All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural The Business Case for Second Chance Employment Conference. We're incredibly grateful to have everybody here today for a day filled with thought-provoking discussions. As we give everybody a couple moments to get settled into their seats, we're going to start with a video that's been shared with us by our partners at NBC. It was produced in collaboration with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
What does it mean to be human? It means finding ways to make a heavy load feel lighter. It means sometimes we lose our way and have to fix what's broken. We sometimes jump to conclusions, forgetting that there's always another side. No one is a question on a page. No one is their worst decision. And no one fits into a box. So keep an open heart. Keep an open mind. Because that's what it means to be human. Defining people not by their past, but by who they decide to become. Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Who can we become?
All right, what an incredible reminder of the impact that our discussions today and the work of Second Chance Hiring has on individuals and their families. Thank you again to everybody for joining us today and our partners at the Business Roundtable, the Second Chance Business Coalition, JPMorgan Chase, Eaton, and everybody here at Columbia for all of the work that you put in to make today happen. And thank you as well for JPMorgan Chase for their support for the Justice Through Code program here at the Tamer Center. Today's first ever convening of leaders in business and higher education was inspired by our partnership with JPMorgan Chase and our shared interest in providing life-changing access to career pathways, education, and economic opportunities for justice-involved individuals. I'm Eaton McDonald, founder and executive director of Justice Through Code at Columbia University. Justice Through Code is a technical and career development accelerator that educates and nurtures talent with conviction histories to create a more just and diverse workforce. Through our software engineering and data analytics tracks, we provide free access to the education, opportunity, and business networks necessary to enter into not just jobs, but high-wage, sustainable careers to individuals with conviction histories. In our first 3 years, we've served 150 participants, and we'll serve 650 throughout 2023 and 2024, with average earnings of only $19,000 a year pre-program to over $70,000 6 months after completion. Our program serves as a reminder of the incredible potential that stands to be unlocked by creating pathways to employment for people with criminal records. We are here today at Columbia because of our decade-long commitment to extending the promise of opportunity that education can provide to all, including those with criminal records. As we start the day, I want to ask each of you to take a quick journey with me outside of the setting we now find ourselves in. And I want you to think about one of the people that you care most about in life. And I want you to imagine witnessing that person for the rest of their life, not being able to fulfill their potential or to provide for themselves because no one is willing to give them a chance. Today, we're going to hear from leaders from across industries about how their organizations are giving that chance. And now, I'd like to share what the impact of giving that chance can look like. Only 4 years ago, in 2019, I walked out of federal prison after spending 4 years incarcerated for cannabis distribution as a first-time offender in California. With a garbage bag filled with everything that I owned, government-issued sweatpants, and a t-shirt, I traveled to New York to finish an undergraduate education that I had started while incarcerated. In the months before I began my studies at Columbia, I searched endlessly for jobs, only to have interviews end abruptly and job offers rescinded once employers learned of my criminal record. I stand here today because of the commitment of people like Sandra Navali of the Tamer Center, Geraldine Downey of the Center for Justice, for taking that chance on me and providing me with the opportunity to stand here in front of you today. I stand here not only as the Executive Director of Justice Through Code, but also a Columbia University graduate and a current Executive MBA business school student at Columbia Business School. As we hear from our panelists today, I want you all to think about what it means to take that chance on somebody and to provide that opportunity. Because I would say, to me, there's nothing exceptional about me besides the fact that I've been given that chance and I've had the opportunity to shine. And so as we go through these panels today, for those of you from the business audience, I would urge you to think about how you can make a deeper commitment to the issues that we're discussing. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend, colleague, Dane Lin, Senior Vice President of Corporate Initiatives at the Business Roundtable.
Thank you, Aiden, and good morning, everyone. Man, that was weak. That was so weak. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Can you tell I was an elementary principal at some point in my career? Thank you, Aiden, and to the entire team at Columbia. I am so excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. Both Aiden's story and the video are stark reminders of why we're here. We're not here just to talk about the importance of providing second chance opportunities to individuals. We're actually here as, or at least my hope, is that we're here to actually launch into action, to either start doing work in this area or to scale and accelerate our efforts in this area. My name, as Aiden has indicated, is Dane Lin, Senior Vice President at the Business Roundtable. The BRT is an association of CEOs of leading American companies who are working to promote a thriving U.S. economy and expanded opportunity to all Americans through sound public policy. BRT has the pleasure of being a founding partner of SCBC, the Second Chance Business Coalition, along with Stand Together, the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, an organization that represents the chief human resource officers in the country, and the Georgetown Pivot Program at Georgetown University. The Second Chance Business Coalition was launched in 2021 to promote the benefits of employment and provide employers with resources to promote, to hire and provide career advancement to people with criminal records. Our co-chairs are Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JPMorgan Chase, and Craig Arnold, the CEO of Eaton Corporation. Both these companies are co-sponsoring the event, and I'd like to, in particular, thank Nan Gibson with JPMorgan Chase and Stan Ball with the Eaton Corporation for their leadership through the coalition. We could not do it without their guidance, their leadership, and their advice to make sure that we're keeping our eye on the prize. The coalition has grown to 46 members, and you're going to hear from several of them today, not just JPMorgan Chase, but you'll also hear from Schnitzer Steel, NBC Universal, PayPal, Eaton, and MasterCard. So why? Why launch another coalition? In DC, coalitions are a dime a dozen. We launched the coalition because business leaders realized that nearly 80 million Americans have a criminal record, yet little opportunity. This is 1/4 of the US population. And having a criminal record, as you've already heard, can present a real barrier to meaningful employment. Not just employment though, but also advancement. We don't just want to give individuals a job. We want to put them on a trajectory of upward mobility. And as I say often in our own organization, better job with better pay, because that's paying it forward. We're creating future generations where we don't repeat the cycle, but we provide opportunities for families and their children and the children of their children. Having a criminal record can present a real barrier to meaningful employment. In fact, a criminal record alone reduces the chances of a second interview by 50%. As a result of this, there is a nearly 27% unemployment rate among formerly incarcerated individuals. These are individuals who want a job, they want a career, but they can't find one. The coalition and our members, CEOs, are committed to expanding opportunities to individuals with criminal records to access in-demand, good-paying jobs with very good benefits, supporting their re-entry into the workforce and society. Yes, it's about filling jobs, but it's also, and more importantly, about creating fairness and opportunity for these individuals. We recently surveyed the coalition's member companies. Of those, 76% have reviewed or updated their human resource policies to be more inclusive of second chance candidates. And 62% have established hiring programs or partnerships to recruit second chance candidates. And in a record tight labor market with nearly 11 million job openings, 2 job openings for every 1 job seeker, now's the perfect time for employers to reflect on new approaches to welcoming candidates, qualified individuals into their workforce. Before I introduce our panel, I'm actually going to do what you typically do at the end of the program now, which is, and here's some challenges, or here's some actions that you can take. What I would encourage all of us is let's use social media to amplify the importance of actually taking action. Hashtag Second Chance Month. Talk about what your organization, what your company is doing. Point to the discussion and the issues that are being discussed today. If by chance, I highly doubt it, but if by chance you don't know what to do or where to take action, I'd encourage you to go to the Second Chance Business Coalition website. For those of you who are more mature in the audience, you'll remember David Letterman's top 10. We have a top 100. Top 100 actions you can take through our on-ramps guide on the Second Chance Business Coalition's website. Commit your nonprofit. Someone in academia, make a commitment, or companies take a commitment to taking one or more of those actions to make hiring and advancing in a company, whether it be a BRT member, a small or medium-sized company, commit to taking one or more of those actions to providing opportunities for individuals with criminal records. With that, I will introduce the first panel. Please now welcome to the stage our moderator, Stephanie Rule, Senior Business Analyst with NBC News, and panelists Hans Vestberg, the CEO of Verizon, and Damian Dwin, the CEO of Lafayette Square, to discuss the business case for second chance employment. Verizon was a founding member of the coalition, and Damian is a longtime advocate for an investor in opportunities for individuals with a criminal record. Welcome to the stage, Damian, Hans, and Stephanie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me part of this very, very important conversation. I'm honored to be here with 2 business leaders so committed to this. You've already gotten a beautiful intro, Hans, but as chair and CEO of Verizon, you've done a lot. Before this, when you were president and CEO of Ericsson, you started that commitment. You have worked around the world. You speak 4 languages despite being born in Sweden. And what I would like to say, maybe what I like most is, despite being a true global citizen, he's raising his children in the Garden State. Damian, after a long, long career on Wall Street, you made somewhat of a pivot as the CEO of Lafayette Square, making a huge commitment, right? As part of Lafayette Square, you are investing in underserved communities to expand who we're hiring, but also by investing in these businesses, you're empowering them to change who our workforce is. You also serve as board chair of the Vera Institute for Justice, which is focused on how we are going to change both our criminal and immigration system and as they relate to hiring today. We're so grateful for the work that you're both doing, so thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
It was mentioned just a moment ago, we hear it all the time. The unemployment rate is super low. Anecdotally, there are 2 open jobs for every unemployed person. Let's just start with, how are those 2 numbers impacting what you do every day?
In my case, of course, we have a large workforce, all the way from the field engineers and to the store employees and to technicians, all the way up to administration of the companies. Of course, there are different facets of it, and then we're also distributed all around the world, but basically in the US. So of course, it's a little bit different geographically, but also in certain cohorts where it's even tougher. But it's clear that the last 4 or 5 years, it has been a quite dramatic change about the responsibility of an employer, an employee, and how important it has become as an employer to see that you're very inclusive and that you actually have much more than compensation as the main mean to keep and retain and attract talent. That has, I mean, I've been CEO since 2010, and I can tell you it's an enormous difference today how you need to think about that. But also, as it was said in the beginning here, it's a tough talent market. It's very few talents out there that you can recruit, so you need to stick out, you need to think differently in order to continue to recruit. In our case, it becomes extremely important, and we have 140 million consumers of the United States that use our service every day. We need to have employees that also represent our customer base. We need everyone from every part of our society to be able to be part of our company. And attracting them is one, retaining them and developing them is another. Both of them are more critical than ever to see that your flourishing company can actually compete well.
But when you talk about inclusivity like that, does that come from a place of philanthropy, or does it come from a place of, we need the most talented bodies, we need to broaden out how we think, not from, because people often say, like,
there's no
especially
philanthropy
right
there.
now,
There's only business. I mean, this is business decision. I mean, that's why I'm saying that what we need to reflect our society and our customer base. I mean, if you have 140 million consumers in the United States, you would know we would have every type of person in this country there, and we need to have the same in our stores, in our field engineers, people developing products. You need to have that in order to have a chance to compete. So this is a pure 100% business decision.
Damien?
I agree with everything that's been said.
Feel a butt.
There's a but. Job quality in the United States is abhorrent. We have a benefits crisis in this country. 50% of workers live check to check. Most workers, don't have $500 of liquidity for an emergency. Inflation is a pay cut for workaday people just because they got out of bed in the morning. And so we're coming off of this really active winter, spring, where there are emergency meetings to save SVB, and there's all this energy about a banking crisis. I don't see that animation regarding the human beings who make up the preponderance of our labor force and their financial insecurity in this moment. The data is very clear. The uptake of retirement benefits and healthcare benefits, particularly by low, moderate income workers, that is those who are 80% of area median income or less, is tragically low. So you have this duality. Wages can only go up so much, even during periods of inflation, and the business community is looking for more bodies, but can only pay so much. Even with what they're paying, the benefits suck, and people aren't using the health care, and they aren't saving any money. So what do you do when you're trying to jam people into jobs that don't actually allow them to retire with dignity or have ends meet? And that's the status quo for our system. You layer onto that returning citizens, and now you start to have the real adult conversation. There's a ton of human capital and talent that has been misallocated, but even as we find seats for that talent, are they stepping into good jobs?
You said two things that I want to follow up on. The SVB example gets a lot of headlines around, we're just helping these wealthy bankers, we're just helping we're just helping the Silicon Valley set. But are we forgetting that there were scores of businesses, small businesses, that hire individuals that wouldn't make payroll had the government not stepped in to backstop just the depositors? And I just want to make sure our audience knows, backstop the depositors, not the investors, not the equity holders, not the sub-debt holders. So I just want to be perfectly clear with our audience when we talk about what happened
I
there.
agree, Stephanie. I'm saying, where's the backstop for low, moderate income workers? So I don't want to take something from SVB. I'm talking about the silence and the lack of energy around tens of millions of Americans who live check to check and don't have people with power pounding the table saying this is a crisis and we have to do something immediately.
You also touch on something that's really important that I think gets missed, where so many employers out there pay so little or offer so few benefits. And you hear this headline out there, well, people would rather stay home than go to work. There's this line, can you talk about that people are missing, that oftentimes if you go out and you get a job, on paper it looks like, oh, that person's working, but people are paid so little or offer so few benefits, they would actually get more if they were getting more government support. So those employers need to start figuring out, what do we do to make it not attractive? It's not like people are staying at home because they like it, but some people aren't taking jobs because they cannot afford to.
It's true. And look, just to pick on Verizon,
Oh, no.
we have a progressive commercial CEO with an HR department that gets the joke. He is the exception, not the rule. If you surveyed the peer group, you would find Verizon is an outlier with its comp, benefits, and hiring practices. So let's just start with first things first.
That's a good kind of picking on.
Well, we need the Fortune 500 to do the right thing.
I agree.
So that's like step one. Meanwhile, in the US middle market, you have 250,000 companies with revenues of $10 million to $1 billion. Those 300,000, 250,000 companies employ 50 million workers. Having 250,000 HR departments, you can see the amplitude and the dispersion of outcomes, but we don't have the consistency. So we're throwing human beings into this mosh pit where they're getting chopped up. And sometimes you have organizations who do it well and do it right, even in high cost markets like the Garden State, your beloved New Jersey, where the cost of living is really tough. But let's talk about a place like Texas, where healthcare benefits are rolling off, places growing like a weed. But are you going to get paid enough, and we have enough resources to actually make it work? And there's very inconsistent labor practices in that state, just to pick on Texas. Right? So this is a local issue. Every jurisdiction has its own set of dynamics. And by the way, in America, you've got so many prisons and jails that it itself comes with a geospatial dynamic. You pour somebody out of the system, 700,000 people per year are coming home looking for jobs, and what happens in one community versus another is so inconsistent at a time when people are vulnerable, coming off of a traumatic experience like being incarcerated.
Texas is the perfect state, though, because when you look at cities like Austin, it's kind of like Pittsburgh in the last 15 years, right? All of these jobs came, all of these technology companies came, but also so did all of these workers from other states, right? And you go right outside Austin, you go right outside Pittsburgh, and you've got entire counties of lower wage workers that lost mill jobs years ago, And many of those new businesses didn't figure out, how am I going to employ these people from outside these cities? Hans, you mentioned it earlier. You've been running your company since 2010.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs who have sat in their seats for this many years. And many say, like, I'm struggling to keep this job. I've got activist investors banging down banging down my door. I have to make these decisions. How have you made different, more inclusive decisions that have ended up being a huge business success for you? And how can you show this to other CEOs who are saying, I'm doing what I can, I got Carl Icahn on my throat?
I think, first of all, coming back to a little bit how we see it, this is pure business for us. If I can retain and develop talent in the company, they are much more productive, and we're going to flourish as a company. And that's why when we benchmark, for example, our attrition rates in stores, etc., it is lower than our competition, and that's very important. And that's why also, as I said in the beginning, I mean, compensation, the salary is just one piece of the full compensation, and that has been very important for us to see that there's healthcare, there are other type of services we can offer, all from mental health, fitness support, and all of that, because that goes into a compensation today, which probably 20 years ago, at least when I started, I didn't even thought about that. The only thing you thought was the headline number for the salary was important. I didn't think about what pension I'm going to get. You know, I'm young, so I don't care. But that has proven, and right now our job as an employer, which we can do even better, is two things. One is to educate all our employees, all the benefits we have, because sometimes they cannot find them. We need to be better to help them out to see what is really right for them. And the second is, the best success we have is, of course, to upskill and train our employees that maybe they start as a field engineer. We have a garage over here with the field engineer. They can continue to be a leader of a team, then going up to be a project leader, and showing them how they do that advancement. So we have several programs, and one of the most important programs I've done the last couple of years, where we've sort of built taxonomy across the company. So you know, I'm working with this today. If I want to get this job, these are the trainings I need to take, and they're all open for me. So you as an employee has a chance to take the responsibility also for your own career. You should always have a manager helping you, what you should do, where you should go, but you also might have a totally different interest. I want to do this. That is super important when you retain talent, develop talent, and ultimately, that's the best talent you have in the company. They're loyal, that you have given them a chance, and that chance has developed to a new job, a new opportunity. Can even be, I need to be in another state, work in another state. I want to work with something else. All of that becomes very important in order to have a strong company that can compete for business. And that's how we see it as a business. That's how I've seen it since I've been working all my time.
But you've been doing upskilling and reskilling programs for years.
For years.
Are they becoming bigger now, more important now, or just getting more focused?
They become more important because, as I said in the beginning, the shift from in the culture, awareness of employees, how important the companies, so they become even more important. Today, you can have an interview with someone and they start asking what type of upskilling programs you have, what training programs you have. That wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago. I mean, hey, what's the salary? Hey, I take the job. Or what's my job title would be the most important. Now they start asking a lot of other things, you know. They talk about the resource groups you have and how you get together. We haven't had that before. But in our case, that started way before I started at Verizon. They thought about that as an important way for us to compete and also tap into resources in this market that few others have done.
Connect this, though, to second chance hiring, because for many, that's a third rail.
No, so I connect that, I mean, and this started way before me. I mean, Verizon decided 2015 to ban the box, meaning that when anybody applies, they don't need to check if they have a criminal record. That we do when we give them the sort of the conditional employment, and that was a way for us to give second chance to people that are coming out from incarcerated, that really want to get back to our society. Our experience is they are very loyal and give it that chance and to come in. And we wanted to take away any biases in the beginning of the hiring process, which you usually have, and especially if it's a box, then you are already taking those type of candidates away. And that has been I think that since we started with it, we have given 60% of the people with criminal records applying the opportunity to get the job, because we gave them the chance to come to the sort of the final level. So it's been an important way for us to get that talent in our company, and very loyal, fantastically good workers. So that's part of the overall, to see that you're getting all the talents in the market and how you develop the company.
Damien, you have been a huge advocate for second chance employment for years, and it's through your portfolio companies, but beyond what you can control through the Vera Institute, which you mentioned earlier, programs like the Georgetown Pivot. But what are you doing, and how do you work to convince other business leaders get on board?
Okay, I think there's a business case for all of this. It was out of necessity that the business community started to think about returning citizens, because they didn't have enough labor. This was not altruistic. There's an economic coincidence here. 40 years of declining interest rates, equity valuations that shot through the roof, can't find enough bodies, and then you realize you have tens of millions of returning citizens who've been given a life sentence because of the box. So the whole notion of banning the box, I think, was a great example of the business community, without government intervention, being rational and saying we can do more and we can do better. I see the capital markets now starting to give voice to, hey, if we get this right, there's a bit of an inflation hedge in doing things for workers, where you don't have to also worry about constantly just moving wages higher, but you upgrade benefits and you get more elasticity in your labor pool. But hey, this typically doesn't get phrased as an anti-inflation conversation, but it is. In the same breath, I would point out the cost of capital should be lower for employers that hire returning citizens. Why?
Explain that.
Why? Because if you have less turnover, higher productivity, you should be rewarded for that. You have an economic advantage in this highly competitive, very dynamic marketplace. And it's interesting, we have more data science and information about what's happening with labor today than we've ever had. So our ability to make the business case has improved dramatically in this moment. But I see this playing out, Stephanie. You're going to see higher interest rates, more equity volatility. I feel like this is like the 1970s revisited. Geopolitical stuff, commodity stuff. It feels a lot like when we were born. Well, guess what? If you can show you're a preferred employer, you provide ballast to investors, and shareholders and bond investors will reward you financially because of that ballast.
You agree with that? Because we keep saying, oh, but it has to be about profitability. This all connects back to profitability and running the best company possible.
You can take examples where we have data analytics. If you are recruited to work in a store, for example, after 3 months, you have a certain productivity. If you stay 6, if you stay 12, of course, you are much better. You do much better business because you know the business better. So retaining talents is definitely proven in our system that we can do much better business. And that goes also for any other type of sales, business to business, whatever we're doing. And we sort of have all that type of businesses. But again, it comes back to take away biases. We did the same with, we are not requiring college degrees or GPAs, and I would say the majority of all the
When
job
did you make that change? Because it's happening in a really big way.
We did that a couple of years ago. So the same goes there. I mean, you don't want any bias. There are certain jobs you might need a degree for, but the majority you don't need a degree. I mean, you want the right individual with the right ambition that can fight. So we took that away as well. But again, it's all about taking away bias as you recruit the right person for the right job. So that it's all the same. And then if you're given the chance, You're going to fight hard and be loyal to the company. I mean, it goes back to my history. I'm Swedish, but I'm born in a northern part of Sweden where there live 5,000 people and people hardly speak. I was given a chance because I was fighting all the time. And that's for me, I didn't have a degree. I haven't gone to any of these fancy schools here or anything like that. But it's again, don't put biases on leaders early on what they should recruit for. They should recruit for a competence, a character, a person. That's more important. Then, of course, in certain cases, you need certain things that you need to check. But ultimately, don't start with that before you're coming into it. I think that goes through the whole idea of Verizon and the leadership. And again, it started way before I came into the company.
Damien, how important is this movement to drop jobs requiring 4-year degrees, and especially as it relates to second chance employment? I mean, the first executive order, the day, his first day in office, the new governor of Pennsylvania, that's what he did. He dropped 4-year degree requirements for state jobs, and it impacted hundreds of thousands of jobs.
American competitiveness hinges on getting this right. I put this issue on par with immigration.
Okay, but here's where the bad news about that is. Putting it on par with immigration is excellent, except, of course, we're not doing anything on immigration, and we're not going to for the foreseeable future.
You say that, but I'm an optimist, and I think we have to be constructive with our friends who have anxiety or fear. And instead of making them feel guilt or shame about that fear, I think we call it out. The math in America does not work without labor beyond our borders, period. And anyone who denies that can offer no facts to counter the point. So without recrimination or accusation, let's just talk about reality. We need foreign-born talent to make the American dream a reality. In addition, we need to create credible, honorable, mobile opportunities for returning citizens because they represent a third of the labor pool in the United States. That's just the math. So the duality of returning citizens and non-citizens and what they mean for American families in West Virginia, the Florida Panhandle, Kentucky, Inland Empire in California. This is a 50-state issue. And I'll also be remiss in not pointing out, we have a report card on doing it the other way.
I desperately want to talk about this and how it impacts immigration reform. I can see the team here going, that is another subject, and we only have so much time. So on another day, I really do want to talk about this, but I want to get back to second chance. Hans, second chance hiring we think of as the initial hire.
Yeah.
But how do those second chance employees, how do you think about that when you think about reskilling, upskilling, and upward mobility within your company?
I think that sort of to attracting employees and then, of course, seeing that you do that unbiased is the first step. Then I think it's a growing responsibility, business responsibility to retain your employees, and that you do by upskilling, giving them opportunities with programs and self-education. I mean, historically, I always go back. When I started, it was up to my manager to tell me, you should do that, I can move you there, or you should take this course or not. In today's society, you need to give more optionality for your employees to do that work themselves as well. You always have a manager that can guide you and so on, but it's even more important when you have a certain job and you want to get to that job. I think I really want that, and then you can see the path. What education, what trainings can I take to get there? That's what we have created in Verizon over the last couple of years, both that we know what type of positions they are and how you can get another position and what are the training you can take. And a lot of our employees are taking those courses themselves in order to self-deploy. So when they're going to apply, they can say, hey, I've taken actually all the steps you asked me to do. And that is a high level of loyalty when you have that, but also given the chance. And of course, we're a large corporation. that has so many different opportunities, both geographically, business-wise. You can work very many things. But that's also our strength, and which we should use as an advantage for us. So that has, I would say, changed quite dramatically the last 5 years. And especially also when COVID came, when many need to go home, and then you start thinking about what do I want to do after this. Having opportunities after that, when I don't know if I want to continue to do what I did before, because you got the chance to reconsider. That has helped us a lot, and in many segments of our business, our attrition has come down quite dramatically because we saw that opportunity, and our employees saw that opportunity as well.
Damien, do you see this as an issue? Second chance hiring basically happens at one entry level, and then do you see it stopping out? Or once a company goes through that process and embraces the second chance mindset, there are no limits?
I think there are no limits. I think incentives matter. So the capital markets providing rewards for businesses that get this right is a big plus. I don't think government intervention is going to be the way where people are told they have to do things a certain way. But clearly, whether it's middle market or large Fortune 500 companies and everything in between, out of necessity, this labor pool is going to be embraced more and more. The demographics in the U.S. drive us to that place. The economic volatility drives us to that place. And great things like today provide tools and infrastructure for those who need to come up the learning curve to get the information, to understand how to elevate and improve their hiring practices. But again, I just want to state it, 50 million employers, 50 million workers in the U.S. middle market employed by 250,000 companies. This is achievable. That's 250,000 heads of HR that we need to educate. And we get them on the same page as their CFO and their CEO in those 250,000 companies, that this labor pool solves a problem. This labor pool is observably, measurably loyal and effective at scale. We have leading large public companies that have given us data on the performance of this labor pool. The water is warm. Welcome.
The water is warm.
How do we think about it for folks in the second chance community, people with criminal backgrounds, but who have a lot of job experience? Because for the most part, when we think about second chance, these are entry-level jobs.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I would say, again, if you have the model that Verizon has since 2015, I mean, anyone can apply to any job in the company. And we see people with criminal records on many levels in the company. So I wouldn't say that. So for us, it has been more about, again, as I said so many times, I mean, it's not a bias for anything when you apply. And that goes, as I said before as well, not requiring a college degree in many things, which also could be a hinder if you have been incarcerated and things like that. So all that comes together, that we get the right people on the right level. So I think that it actually worked out well for us. And again, all our data tells us that many of these employees are extremely loyal, thankful for the company giving them a second chance and doing a great work. And that's the data you're talking about. And that's so important, because ultimately you want very loyal employees that lives the brand every day and lives your core values every day. That's what makes a company. That's how you succeed. That's how you make money, and that's how you make profit.
Same to you.
I totally agree. And let's face it, people exit the system under 50, over 50. People get into the system for a lot of different reasons. Yep. And we need no age bias in this discussion. It needs to be about human capital, wherever it resides.
Hans, you are sort of this shining example, but I want to go back to sort of your peers who are stuck on the stigma or not embracing this. Do you think any of it has to do with something you mentioned a few minutes ago? You come from northern Sweden. You didn't go to these fancy, necessarily Ivy League schools that other business leaders here did. Do you think that's one of the reasons why you're more open to this and potentially some of them are more resistant?
No, I wouldn't draw that conclusion.
Then why are others more resistant?
I don't know. I mean, I think, guys like me, we're very focused on what we are responsible for and what we are doing every day. And I think this is the model that is fitting Verizon and also my previous employer, which had employees in 180 countries. We're one of the most global companies in the world. So it just comes natural when you have the chance. And I've lived in 7 countries, I've seen so much, and ultimately giving people a chance that are different has been, or different, they have different skill sets, has been enormously important for me. So, no, I don't know, I cannot really talk for others, I can talk for what we are doing as a company. And again, this is not the one-person show or me doing it. It's embedded in the HR system, it's embedded in the leadership when I do it. It's not me telling everybody to do it, it's just normal core values in our company because it's good business. So I cannot draw any conclusion about what others are doing. I can only draw a conclusion what we are doing and why it's happening.
Damien, why do you think others are resistant?
I could speak about the sources of fear and anxiety. I don't think it helps. I think we have to show examples of people who make it work, and that your women and children are not going to be endangered, and you don't have something to be afraid of. So we have so many great models of success where returning citizens have been able to partner with local colleges and universities. Like Georgetown does in Washington, D.C. They've been able to get internship opportunities. They've been able to prove themselves. The volume of data, and Hans, I might even put this forward as something Verizon thinks about as a side project.
Yeah.
Just share the stats
Yeah.
on what's happened over the last 10 years as a leading employer with tens of thousands of bodies that have come through the organization, the retention of those bodies, the wages of those bodies. And all of a sudden, I think people start to say, wait a minute, I don't have as much to be afraid of as I thought, because you could also publish the crime statistics from inside of Verizon, and it turns out a bunch of bad things have not happened. Human beings want to live a good, happy life. People make mistakes, and we are a nation of second chances. So this is the American underdog conversation, and I don't want to make people feel bad or guilty for feeling shame or fear about any of this. I want to actually embrace them and give folks good data and good examples on why it works.
On the other side, as an employer, are you dealing with this voter mindset, voter shift that crime is a top issue and we need to be tough on crime? Is that impacting what you're doing at all?
No.
Good.
No, of course, I mean, we are aware of the society. I mean, we have almost 9,000 stores in the country. Of course, we understand that there are happening things a lot around us and we need to be more cautious, but it's not like it's part of our decision making or something like that, no.
Do you see it as a roadblock in any way?
No, I think let the debate happen. It's gonna take its course. The reality is, I love New York City, especially in the summertime. Like there's a reason people like to come here. There's a reason folks like to enroll at Columbia. We have great institutions. We have great communities. We have to hold them up. People will villainize and say bad stuff, but folks vote with their feet.
We don't need to be part of a debate. I'm honored to be here as part of a positive movement. Damien, Hans, thank you both for all that you do. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for including me. Thanks
Thank you
so
so much.
That was a great start to our day's agenda. Thank you, Stephanie, Hans,
Thank
and
you.
Damien.
I have a
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back,
Give
we're going to
more.
hear from some additional companies.
All right, if everybody could please welcome me in welcoming to the stage our moderator, Dane Lin, SVP at Business Roundtable, and panelist Michelle Caranti, Executive Director of New Joiner Experience at JPMorgan Chase, Eric Wilson, CHRO Schnitzer Steel, and Huai Scott, SVP HR at NBC Universal. Welcome Dane, Michelle, Eric, and Huai to discuss their experiences developing policies and practices to support second chance employment. Thank you.
Thanks, Aiden, and thank you for the introduction so we can jump right on in to the discussion. Now we're going to focus on the conversation where the rubber hits the road. But I never miss an opportunity to take the prerogative that I have as the facilitator of this discussion to follow up on a couple of points I heard from the previous session. The first point I want to make is let's not pretend this issue around hiring and advancing individuals with criminal records is separate and apart from the issues around skills-based hiring, as one example. This is part of a larger ecosystem of change that we're trying to create. And secondly, while we have 46 members of the Second Chance Business Coalition, and we're always attempting to grow that, Verizon is one example. You're going to hear from 3 other individuals who are members of the Second Chance Business Coalition. But there really is, at least among our members at the BRT, a groundswell of companies who want to open the aperture of hiring, who want to and who are opening the aperture to hiring the population of individuals that we're here to talk about today. And what better opportunity do we have than to hear from the people who actually create, sometimes they eliminate, policies and practices that actually are going to enable us to reach the goals that they've set for hiring individuals that are not just in response to filling the vast number of jobs that they have open, but to creating more opportunity for more individuals. And I want to start with you, Michelle Caranti, who again is the Executive Director of the New Joiner Experience. We all talk about JPMorgan Chase and the 10% hires over the past 3 years. Each year, 10% of your new hires have been individuals with criminal records. Like, that didn't happen quickly. Talk a little bit about what that looks like. How did you get there? And what are the types of jobs that individuals are getting hired to take advantage of at the company? And in addition to the hiring, Michelle, retention. I think retention's a huge issue that we often gloss over. So what is it that you've done around recruitment and retention?
Recruitment and retention is 2 things. First off, from a hiring standpoint, in 2018, we banned the box to eliminate the question on our applications, and then did some internal work looking at our policies and practices, and then announced in the fall of 2019 a formal Second Chance initiative and effort that we have underway, which is a multi-pronged approach. One is our Policy Institute and our Policy Center, along with the work with the Second Chance Business Coalition that drives policy and work around there. Secondly is obviously with hiring and eliminating the box, so to speak, it's also looking at our hiring practices once someone does receive a contingent offer and the individualized job screening process that we are doing to make sure that people are fit for the jobs from a safety and security standpoint. But then also we did also launch at that time a community-based hiring model to work directly with community partners and workforce partners and legal partners in the communities to do the left of application support, to make sure that they had skilled training, but also were aware so that when they could apply to an organization like ours that can be pretty big, some of that is demystified, that they know what to expect, when to expect it, and that they're able to focus on their skills and what they bring to the table to the jobs. So those are the main things that we have done to get there.
Yeah, let me, Eric, I'm going to come to you, the Chief Human Resource Officer, and so I don't have to say that over and over, CHRO of Schnitzer Steel. Maybe a quick study on who is Schnitzer Steel, what do you do, and what's the work that you've done around hiring individuals with criminal records? In particular, I'm really most interested in the results.
Got it. So Schnitzer Steel, we are a metals recycling organization. We're mid-sized, nowhere close to Michelle's organization. We have about 3,500 employees. We operate in 33 different states and the 2 western provinces. And what we do is we recycle end-of-life metal. So refrigerators, vehicles, et cetera. And our focus really around why we've built a second chance program, really driven, centered around the challenges that we face as an organization. Being industrial, being physical labor, it's been very challenging for us to attract talent into our organization. We've utilized the traditional recruiting methods of job boards, partnerships with organizations like the military, and it just hasn't been enough. So what we did, starting back, similar to Michelle, back in 2015, we banned the box as part of our application process, but we really steered our focus around second chance, recognizing and appreciating that over a quarter of adult Americans have a background. And we were missing the opportunity to attract that talent into our organization.
Yeah, Eric, I want to follow up because one of the things we hear from our member companies on skills-based hiring is really around the training of the people who hire. And how do you overcome, what have you done to overcome some of the cultural issues, the attitudes for those people who actually sign off before they make the recommendation to you?
No, great question. And for us, it started with our chairman and CEO, Tamer. She is our champion around second chance and any and every opportunity to pursue talent and bring it into our organization. That was quickly followed by our board and their engagement in the program itself. It's something that starting in 2021, they've asked me on a quarterly basis to brief them on our successes, our challenges, and the activities that we were pursuing. Coupled with that, though, we operate in large parts of the country, the Bay Area, in Tacoma, for example, but we also operate in very small remote locations. So a lot of our focus was around leveraging our leadership, who oftentimes grew up in those smaller communities and had strong credibility with state and community leadership. And we leveraged them to have that engagement when opportunities to open doors and visit with the leadership in the communities. But probably more importantly and more transformational for us has been our internal communications, Dane. What we do is we highlight our second chance hires. We highlight all of our hires and all of our success stories, if you will, on a quarterly basis. We have all employee town hall calls with our chairman and CEO, and she highlights successes. We also offer CEO office hours calls on a monthly basis where we engage with a small group of around 25 of our employees, and they come from all diversities, all backgrounds, and it affords them the opportunity and exposure with our CEO and to learn more about their challenges and how we can break down the barriers that they've experienced in the past to make sure that they don't become new barriers for us going forward.
Yeah, implicit in your response, and that I picked up on was, we're not here, it's around geography, and that we're not talking just about this issue in relationship to Chicago, New York City, Atlanta. I mean, we're talking about those tier 2, maybe not even tier 3 cities, those rural locations that Damien mentioned moments ago. And so I think it's really an attempt to create, again, this groundswell of providing opportunity regardless of location, and particularly in an environment where you can do a lot of remote working in some of the member companies, at least through BRT and the Second Chance Coalition, that we want to provide those opportunities regardless of where you live. Hoy Scott, Senior Vice President of HR with NBC Universal, what a powerful PSA that we saw in the opening. And you guys do just a great job of storytelling. And I want to hear about not just the storytelling you do to change hearts and minds, but the involvement in the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. And how does the participation in that coalition helping drive the type of change that we're all here to talk about today?
Thank you. Yes, we started our relationship with, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. We started our relationship with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition in 2018 when our CEO learned about second chance hiring. And he learned about all the, the great data around hireability, promotability, all the barriers that exist. And so in 2018, actually before the social reckoning, we actually started providing employment opportunities for our returning citizens. And it wasn't really until after the social reckoning that we started leaning into our other skills as well. And so what we are a film company. So I work for Universal Pictures. And so Hollywood has been known to be the informal ministry of propaganda. And so we put stories in the world and we put narratives in the world. And sometimes they include harmful stereotypes, right, that perpetuate images of danger, inferiority, guilt. And so we really felt like we had a responsibility to be part of the change. And if people don't learn something different, they just stick with what they know. And so we really felt like, you know, we needed to lean into our superpower of changing narratives. And so we partnered with the ARC to not only provide employment opportunities, but really think about how could we change the broader societal narrative.
And talk to me a little bit about, as a result of changing the narrative, what are some examples you'd point to where you've seen actual change happen as a result of that narrative?
I would say, in general, because there is a stigma of formerly incarcerated people, that when we started doing this work, people wondered, are we putting our employees at risk? Is it dangerous, right, for our staff? And what we did was we really got to know the ARC and their members and really understood the benefits, as well as how do we connect people with each other so that the narrative changes, right? And so we've had people join our organization, and that human connection of learning stories and barriers, and really everybody who has been a part of our partnership has been changed by the experience. And it could be anything from an intern that has imagined new possibilities for him or herself that was never imagined before, or the intern that finishes college and sponsors and inspires the people in his community to go to school. We have an intern that is now a full-time employee, and he is actually a speaker for the Human Rights Watch. And he goes back to prisons, and he talks about how you can be released, and after 25 years, and he provides hope, right? He talks about employers that believe in second chances, and he provides hope in a place where usually there isn't any. And I think we know that hope saves lives. And so there are a few examples of people, really the kind of that ripple effect of people changing and then changing the people around them. And with the PSA, we're trying to get the broadest reach possible with regard to changing the narrative, but really the human-to-human contact also is part of the change.
Great. So I'm not going to pick, really, this question is not targeting attorneys, but I do want to open the floor here, maybe start with you, Michelle. You're a heavily regulated industry.
Very.
There are some things you can and cannot do.
Correct.
When it comes to hiring people. But talk to me more about the solutions you created to hire individuals with records as you worked with your legal counsel. Like, what are the barriers you had to overcome, and what was real versus what was a myth?
So I think, first of all, for anybody who hasn't heard about Jamie Dimon, this all started with a human, right? He actually came into Chicago one time, spent some time with one of our workforce partners and our philanthropy partners, and met with some individuals, and they told their stories, right? And the biggest thing he kept hearing was they want jobs, they want an opportunity. And so now it's been part of his shareholders, and it's part of, it's the human side of what we do. And what was interesting is when you have someone like Jamie come back and say, figure it out, it does break down some barriers, right? Like, so CEOs can do that. But it really was looking at what can we do, both from an internal standpoint and what are we comfortable with, and just in terms of really looking at the individual cases at hand where there is not a matter of law. But then importantly, that has also driven a lot of our government work in terms of policy. Really looking at FDIC, which is something that does put up barriers in terms of what we can and cannot hire for many of our employees, in fact, all of them, so here in the United States. And so that has allowed us to really have those conversations with them. We've seen certain changes in the FDIC Section 19 requirements, not to get technical and lawyerish there, that also resulted in the Fair Chance Hiring Banking Act. I think I got it wrong, but that was passed in December. That really looks at removing some of the legal barriers. There's also clean slate legislation. Another interesting part is, again, going back to the groundswell that starts to happen as an employer, our legal group really heard about some of our work. They do volunteer pro bono work. They've actually taken up, along with our community managers and many of our community branches, expungement clinics, where they're truly helping individuals to remove some of their own barriers by eligibility of expungements. And so again, how we're coming as a full force of the firm to lift up individuals, lift up our communities, but also create great talent pipelines for us.
Eric, any barriers that you encountered with legal counsel?
No, not at all. I'm glad to work where I work instead of JPMorgan with you, Michelle. No, actually, internally, there really were no barriers. We were a little risk averse initially, Dane, as part of our background check review process. But starting in 2020, we set that aside, and we've had a tremendous success. Similar to Michelle, 10% of our hires over the last 3 years are those with a felony background. But probably the most transformational result for us has really been on the retention side. We operate in a very volatile a lot of our competition is retail, so we have high turnover, and we range in the 70 to 80% in segments of our business. But those with a second chance that we've hired, we're having retention of 50%. So, I mean, that goes a long ways, both externally, but probably more importantly, internally for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because this is a data point we hear over and over, that the retention rate for individuals with criminal records is much higher than the average population that work for companies. One of the things, Hoy, one of the things we've learned is that companies are hiring earlier and earlier. And that population is coming through internship, work-based learning opportunities. So I know you're part of the ARC program. I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And how does that program actually give individuals with records, put them on equal footing, if you will, getting in the door early, just as much as the individuals without records?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we asked the ARC to fully vet people that they think will be successful in our organization. So we feel very comfortable that they come to us committed to being drug-free, violence-free, and really committed to being successful in the corporate work world. And so what we do is we try to set them up with every chance for success, right? Because it's really not about just giving people the opportunity. It is really helping our leaders own their success. So that what that means is making sure that our leaders are interviewing people in the right way, right? When we think about how do you interview and you have somebody who has a background that's different, right? And do you ask questions about their background that may be too invasive? And so what we did was we looked for supervisors that are willing to take a growth mindset with regard to this work and really be able to learn from their mistakes. This is new for so many people. And so we wanted people to understand they would make mistakes, and that's okay. We wanted leaders to provide the flexibility that people need. Maybe they have court dates or volunteer opportunities that they needed to go to, or they need to go to school. And so leaders had to have that level of flexibility. And we also talked about what's the right language to use, right? Let's make sure we don't use dehumanizing language. And oftentimes when we talk about formerly incarcerated people, we say ex-con or felon, criminal, inmate, right? An inmate is a very demoralizing word for formerly incarcerated people. And so we taught our leaders the right words to use to have a growth mindset. From every session of internship, we learned from it. So we did a postmortem afterwards, and we learned. And so we had learned that one of our candidates, had experienced an interview that was too invasive. And so we trained our leaders on making sure that you ask job-relevant questions, right? That you're having an inclusive interview. We don't want to force anybody or anyone to feel compelled to tell their story if they're uncomfortable, because sometimes the retelling of stories is traumatizing.
Yeah.
Right? And we even looked at, for example, there was an intern that during his internship process, in our average conversation, we might say, take a stab at it, give it a shot, right? And he said he felt unwelcome because of that language. And so we don't really think about kind of the average language that you use and how that can also make someone feel unwelcome. And so all those things taught us lessons. And then what we did was we trained our leaders, we created toolkits, and we trained our leaders on how to do this, right? How to own the development and the success of your interns so that it's much more than just giving somebody, one chance. It's owning their success and owning their development.
Yeah, what do you do to prevent, I call it the backsliding? You do all the training, but sometimes people go back to their old behaviors.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how, what does the regular training look like so that you can actually not just maintain, but advance?
Yeah, well, we make ourselves available. And so we say, this is going to be hard, this is going to be uncomfortable, you're going to make mistakes, you might step back, but we are here, right? We are here to be a part of your journey. And we really, as HR people, as employment law, as our talent acquisitions team, we make ourselves available for when people are starting to feel uncomfortable. And it's really in that discomfort, right, where you get the growth.
Great. Eric and Michelle, where do work-based learning opportunities, where do internships or registered apprenticeships, or if not registered, an apprenticeship, how does that fit into the bank of solutions that you're implementing at your companies?
Want to go first?
He said the word bank, so I figured it
Okay,
would be
well,
kind of your space.
first of all, it's every job and every entry point into an organization is an opportunity for someone with criminal backgrounds, especially when you ban the box. And hiring managers and recruiters, we actually have a very unique approach in that they never find out that somebody had a criminal background. So it is in a contained group so that the employee is not having, if they come on board, having to explain themselves or have that follow them in that regard. So they are coming in through internships. They are coming through apprenticeships. And they are coming through regular employees at every level of organization. I think there is a misnomer that people with a criminal background is always at a certain stage. Guess what? When you have 70 million Americans with a criminal background, they're at different stages in their careers, they're at different stages of their lives, different stages of their skill profiles, and they have to have the ability to have the opportunity to come in where they're at. So yes, they come in through those things, but we don't have a designated second chance program per se where people are entering into because we did find that we didn't want to call that out for individuals. We wanted them to have entry points of where they're at.
Yep. Yeah, and before you jump in here, Eric, I asked this question too because, again, this is about second chance employment. It's about, for us at BRT at least, the apprenticeship accelerator. It's about skills-based hiring. It's about solid lines, not even dotted lines to all of these different components, which I think are critical to building the ecosystem that we're all after. But Eric, on the question?
Yeah, and we leverage apprenticeships on a fairly small scale, but in regards to skills-based, probably 98% of our jobs are skills-based focused. We have no academic requirements except for limited roles within our finance organization. So we cast a very broad net. We don't have limitations as it relates to segments of the population. But what we do once we get them into our organization is something that we believe is much more transformational. Is we have a curriculum of over 300 courses in multi-languages that touch all the basic foundational elements of learning, from reading, writing, the technologies, teams, all the technologies that come to us these days. And I would say we introduced that in May of 22, and we've had over 2,000 of those courses taken by our employees. And that's both second chance employees as well as our entire workforce. The thing that I will thank you, not that this is a promo for BRT, but thank you for the connection to McDonald's last year. What we also did in the latter part of 22 is introduced a financially funded in full high school diploma program. And that has been extremely well received. Of our 5 recipients that are going through the program right now, each of them are second chance hires.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting, and would love to hear a little bit more, Eric, to this, I'm going to call it a learning portal. Like, how do you not solely depend on a third party, whether it's a nonprofit organization or higher education? How has Schnitzer Steel taken responsibility for saying, we have people who need to beef up their skills. They may be foundational reading skills, but talk to us about what that looks like. How did you go about developing that? And who did you work with to do it? Because I think many companies are trying to figure out how do they create that learning anywhere, anytime, any place can happen and through the materials that you develop?
Yeah. Well, actually, what we did is we kind of came at it from the bottom up. We actually went to all of our employees. We surveyed, we had focus groups, we had one-on-one sessions with our workforce to talk about what are the things that you would like to pursue, that you feel are limiting your ability to grow both within our organization and just personally. And so we took that and we cobbled that together and partnered with an organization called DDI to establish a curriculum of those over 300 courses that are done in classroom, they're done virtually, they can be done on their mobile device. And that's the partnership that we established based upon what we heard from our workforce.
Great. Let's focus a little bit on advancement. It's not just getting people hired. It's about showing them a path to upward mobility, developing more skills for better jobs with better pay. Who wants to take that one first? What does that look like for you? Hoy?
Sure, I'm happy to. Yeah, we create career pathways, right? So we bring them in as interns, but we don't hire people just for the job that they're being hired into. And what we're looking to do really is create a culture of feedback. And so we think about feedback actually an act of equity and an act of justice, because a lot of times we have first generation people, first time college in their family, first time corporate job. And what we look to our leaders to do is to really let them know how to advance their skills. So they're owning the development, the skills of their people. And so we really look at what are the ways? How do you, as a leader, take ownership? How do you understand, have the conversation to understand what the person's ambitions are? And we had somebody actually join as an intern in a marketing department. And after the internship, he was hired on as an apprentice editor. And then now he's an assistant editor in a marketing department of a movie company. And it's a very coveted and valued job. And it really was merit-based, right? We set the person up to succeed, but really it was the development of the skills in order for the person to continue to advance. And we hire people in production, IT, in film tech, in HR, in marketing. And it really is for the purpose of career pathways, that they're jobs that were really where they can advance in their careers and not just entry-level jobs.
Michelle?
So I can try to do that. Obviously, we're a big company. And one of the things that you find is, and I've seen this in my own career, being there about 26 years, is it's like a little bit of an amoeba, right? So we hire individuals in. Yes, we have career journeys. Yes, we have the education benefits for individuals that are 100% paid for. Yes, we have all of those opportunities. But people's lives and interests and those kind of things change as they kind of go through their careers. And so I think it is critical to have a culture of internal mobility, the support mechanisms to be able to do that, things like the business resources groups and other channels to help lift individuals up so that people can go from technology into, I don't know, product or into HR, other areas of the bank. And I think, yes, there's career journeys. Yes, there's journey maps around things. But I think one of the beauties of having an organization like ours and some of the sets that we've done in terms of upskilling and job reskilling and some of those types of works is that people are able to look at a menu and without changing a 401k, build a career that can go in different ways for themselves.
Indeed, we do have career paths as well for most of our first line positions. But what we do is we also have on top of that, we've built a level up program. So for each of those roles within that path, they've got defined periods of time in which the skill set should be achieved. And we evaluate the progress against that timeline with the employee. And when there appears to be a gap, then there's the partnership directly with the employee and the manager to create development plans. And that's where we then steer back to that learning journey that we talked about earlier with all those courses to help them accelerate their progression in both their existing role and their progress forward.
So the CEO tells you to jump, and you ask how high, or maybe you don't ask, you just jump, jump, jump. How does this work not become the sole responsibility of HR? And what does it look like at each of your companies? And who's involved in developing and implementing this strategy so that it just doesn't fall on the CHRO or someone in talent acquisition? to get this right, and not just get it right, but to be successful?
Well, I'll go real quick. For us, it is a partnership with all of our leaders. We've got within our organization of 3,500, over 500 leaders, and they own the hiring process. They own the development of their workforce. So it's not just a responsibility of one or our CEO to have those conversations quarterly or monthly, like I described earlier. It really resonates and sits with each of our respective sites and the leadership at our sites from a hiring and development perspective. And they've embraced it without barrier and without burden.
Yeah. Hoy?
Yeah, I'll add to that. People have been asking now that you're potentially moving into a recession, budgets are being cut. How do you continue the DEI work, the momentum on it? And really what we say is that authentic DEI is done through our leaders and our employees. And so we embed the DEI work in our culture. And so it is owned by every employee, every leader, and they move the work forward. It is done through our team.
No small
Yeah.
company.
I think it's at every level and every organization, obviously from the frontline managers to the business leaders. We do have, what's been interesting about this work, it is a hugely cross-collaboration group, which has allowed me to get to know some great people across the firm that I might not have otherwise, whether it be in our corporate responsibility organization, to our legal group, to our global workforce screening group, to talent, obviously our talent acquisition group, but a lot of our business leaders, right? A lot of our business leaders, they show up, right? They're spending time with our workforce partners to explain what their roles are and with the career paths and the skill journeys they have, as well as what training are they working on post that. So it is something that is across the organization. And you even see it now with our, Damien mentioned, middle market companies. Right now you see it because, again, we're sending out a demand signal. We're showing how we can do it and stand up. And a lot of our organizations that we support from a middle market or small business companies, right, it's another resource for them to help them in terms of their thinking about their labor strategies and our human capital strategies. And so I think that's been a big part of that, and seeing our leaders even in those organizations talk to it with their clients and customers who are also out there dealing with human capital issues. So it's not just an HR thing. In fact, we just play one part,
Yep.
and the rest of the company plays their part.
This work's like never ending. Like it's never, there are some assignments we all get, you like check, you move on to the next item, but this is about continuous improvement.
Mhm.
What are you optimistic about? And maybe a different spin on the question I was going to ask, like, what's not going as well as you thought? And how'd you fix it?
I would say for us, we started this journey back in 2015, and it was extremely slow and frustrating. Fast forward, we reached 2020, and being a part of this coalition has catapulted us forward to the success and the highlights that I mentioned earlier with regards to our hiring. Had it not been for leveraging the insight and the size of the organizations that are part of the coalition, I'm highly confident that we would have still been at a very slow pace of success. So for us, it's really been about the partnership.
And the CEO.
Well, she helps.
Yeah, I
Others?
would say what I'm optimistic about is that employees have really reevaluated what they expect from their workplace,
Mhm.
and they want to know that their workplace is allowing them to bring their full talents and experiences to work, to do meaningful work with other people. And that's worked to our benefit because we do embed DEI in our culture. And I'll give one example of, when we embarked upon this after the social reckoning, we had employees come forward and said, what can I do? What's my part?
Mm.
And we had one employee is the head of stage plays. And he said to me, I'm really interested in getting involved. And so what I do is I kind of keep that information in my back pocket and think about, okay, how can I leverage this person? And so the ARC came to me at one point and said, we want to do a stage play that centers the stories of women. And I said, oh, have you ever done a play before? And they're like, no, but we're going to do it. And I said, okay, great. So let me, connect you to our head of stage plays. And so I went to him and I said, hey, do you remember when you asked what you could do. I have an opportunity for you to leverage the skills that you already have to contribute to this work with the ARC. And I told him about it, and he said, it would be my honor to do this work. And so I really believe that people want to do things that are meaningful, that adds to the broader society, and these opportunities make people feel like our DI work is authentic.
Michelle?
So I'll talk about, again, the real life stories being in talent acquisition and new joiner experience. When we first started this work, it was not easy. In fact, there was many times that I was like, okay, is this really one of those things, right? The first couple of months of doing this and really understanding FDIC and the regulations and all of those interfaces to doing that and having some conversations around that. When you do see things that you can really use as examples when our policy institute is doing things like white papers or having those conversations. But what's also been very interesting is that during the pandemic, it became critical for us because all of a sudden, courts house were closed. People couldn't get documentations, like all of those kind of things happening. But we actually looked at it as an opportunity for us to work with our community partners who were able to help people get things that they maybe didn't have access to or learn how to do Zoom. And we were able to hire a lot of individuals from that. One thing that has not worked well sometimes has been, okay, you can't be dependent on one job. That's why I talk about entry points. And so really looking at what are the skills that our community partners are building and what are the different jobs and roles that people come into so that you're not dependent on the demand of one job, but that you are looking at what their entry point into the organization. I think that's been a big learning for us.
I think this is a great point. It's such an important point, and it's where we see a lot of activity among our members, at least, is how do you build the bank of skills for an individual? How does that individual develop those skills with the help of their employers, but not see the acquisition of those skills as linear? That there are a lot of different ways, like a spider web, you can go to apply those skills. You may be in computer science, but you may end up doing something completely different based on aspirations, quite frankly. So I think particularly in this economy where agility is so important to be successful, we're here with big companies, and we have a lot of viewers online in addition to those who are here with us today. But even big companies call the Second Chance Business Coalition and they ask, where the heck do I start? They just don't know. What's your advice?
Oh, wow. My advice would be doing what they're doing, which is calling the Business Coalition. And again, the
Right
group,
answer.
I mean, not you, Dane, but the rest of the groups. But in all seriousness, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, this coalition, the BRT, the opportunity to engage and hear from others and their experiences has been transformational for us. So reaching out, I would be my advice.
Great, thanks, Eric. Boy?
Yeah, I would say the first thing to do is educate yourself on the barriers to entry. And we're part of SCBC, and so we have a toolkit for that, a social justice toolkit.
Yeah.
And so we're happy to share it. And I think that education is the foundation for compassion, which is understanding people suffering and doing your part to alleviate it. And so the education part, I think, is key. In order to care, open your hearts about this group of people who really are severely impacted by systemic racism, right? And so I think that's why we have to do our part is people are born into a script that they have no control over, right? The color of your skin, the community you're born into, the parents that you had, right? Were you abandoned so you felt safer on the streets and you joined a gang, landed in prison, right? Where you're brutalized and traumatized. And then when you are ready for release, you're stigmatized, right? And why have we been accepting of this, right? It's a narrative of dehumanization. And so I think we can't accept that any longer. So I think educate yourself on the barriers and understand people suffering and why it's important. And then I would say, think about what is your superpower as a company, right? And use that superpower, right? We're a film company, we tell stories. That's why we leaned into this part of the work.
Great. Michelle, you get the last word.
I think it's the first and foremost is always just talk to people. People telling their own stories and what they bring to an organization will always forever change, right? Like, so seek to understand what people have to bring to the table and not how to eliminate, but how to include.
Thank you, the three of you. These are three great examples of what companies are doing to open the aperture to individuals with criminal records. Many more, I think you'll hear on the remainder of the agenda about what other companies are doing, but please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you.
We'll take another 10-minute break and reconvene. So welcome back from the break. I'm now going to turn this stage over to Eaton, Director of Justice Through Code, who will lead the discussion on how business schools can address second chance employment through innovation programs like Justice Through Code. You ready? Please welcome Makeda, Tyler, Austin, and Maria to the stage.
You first?
All right, welcome back, everybody. I have the distinct pleasure today of getting to talk today with some people I've grown very close with through my work at Justice Through Code over the last couple years. So again, welcome Makeda, Tyler, Maria, and Austin. Would love to start out, we've heard a lot today about kind of the business impact of second chance employment, but we know at the core of this is really the human impact, right? And so I'd really love to start with both Makeda and Maria, who are graduates of the program, to hear more about, what was it like for you, your experience in Justice Through Code, what did it mean to you, and especially what did it mean to you to be given that chance for second chance employment? Makeda.
Thank you all for having me today. It's really hard to express how much my experience with Justice Through Code has meant to me, to my family, to my community, and really, even as I was exploring the pathway, it never felt real. And for it to be real at this point is just a dream come true for not only myself, but for my community, for my daughter, and for my grandson's future even. When I was released from prison in 2018, I really didn't know what the future held for me. I got a degree while I was inside, but when I started the job search, it was like no one wanted to give me an opportunity, no one. And I wasn't someone who didn't have experience. In fact, I wasn't someone who even ever imagined my life would lead me to prison, I had a job, I had a career. I worked as a legal assistant for the Department of Buildings for 8 years prior to my incarceration. And so I had some skills, and now I had a degree. And still, when I came home with all those things under my belt, when I went to do job interviews, folk would just deny me as soon as they found out that I had a criminal conviction. And it would go as far as me getting to the point of getting a job, and they would be like, okay, I'm sorry, we cannot give you this job any longer because of your criminal conviction. So when I finally did land, I was making minimum wage, and it was hard because I had a daughter. At the time, my daughter was pregnant. I had my mom who was struggling, working as a and I didn't know how I was going to help my family, how I was going to help myself. I was making $15 an hour, and I was barely surviving. I felt like, if you had a $30,000 job before I went in, you could live a bit. But when I came home, I couldn't even buy a McDonald's meal $5 anymore, So I was struggling, and I said to myself, no one wants to give me an opportunity. Thank you. No one wants to give me an opportunity. What do you do? So when I stumbled upon the opportunity to learn coding, the thing that drew me in was a pathway to a better future and an employment opportunity that was going to be able to sustain my family. And once I got in, I was like, oh my God, I really love this, and I really can do this. And I tried it and I got accepted into the program and it changed my life. It planted a seed for my whole entire life. Like I can't even explain like the effect of this program. I started as a person who just completed a 9.5-year sentence as a first-time offender, and now I'm a software engineer. And to my family, to my community, thank you. Thank you so much. To my family and community, that means the world, because even before, you know, having a criminal conviction, I remember one time someone said to me, we don't see anybody saying, I'm going to be a pilot in our communities because we don't see that. And we don't see software engineers. We don't believe that we can be the things that we can actually be. And this program actually made that come true. And now there's so many people that see my situation and see where this program has brought me, and they say, I believe that I can be something, and I can never, ever be more grateful to any situation than I am to Justice Through Code.
My experience with Justice Through Code, I found out about Justice Through Code maybe in 2018, 2019, when I was attending California State University Northridge, and I was part of Project Rebound there. And so they sent me this information because I was the only computer science major there, right? So I reached out and I was like, hey, can I join? You guys can set me up on Zoom. I'll be there, right? But it was like, oh no, we're not doing Zoom, whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. But I wanted to meet other individuals like myself, right? With similar backgrounds, pursuing, interested in coding, interested in, because, with Project Rebound, majority of everyone is either Chicano studies, social work, which is cool. But no one was computer science, right? No one was engineering. And when I found out about this program, I was like, I got to get in. I got to get in and meet other individuals like myself. So when the pandemic hit, who was the first one to apply? Because it all went Zoom, right? It all went virtual. And just being able to network with Aiden, Makita, other individuals like myself, networking with Emergent Works. I did their program as well, Next Chapter. And after graduating, I was able to start a little cohort with Homeboy Industries and Project Rebound, where I teach formerly incarcerated people the basics of JavaScript, so they have that to pass that Hack Reactor exam for Next Chapter. And I'm so grateful for Aiden and other individuals that made this pathway, right? And giving back is something I love to do, right? And so now, based on that, now I'm applying to MBA programs because I want to be a manager. I don't want to be just a software engineer. I want to go, if I can get to an executive level, they'll watch me. But that's with the help of this program.
Right.
Thank you. To Tyler and Austin, you've been two of our longest supporters of the program. Austin, through your time as an executive MBA student at the business school, and Tyler, through your work at Amazon Web Services. Love to hear more about kind of starting with Austin, your motivation for getting involved in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. First, it's an honor to be back here as an alumni. Every business school student sort of imagines what it would be like when they can come back as an alum. I'm sure that there are MBAs in the audience who have thought similar things, and it's a real privilege that this is the circumstance. So thank you, Aiden. I was really primed for it. I took a sequence of classes at Columbia called REAP, the Reentry Acceleration Program, starting with a half block week, 3 or 2.5 intensive days on the background of the role of business and the crisis of mass incarceration. And coming into that, I had done as many had done in the years since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm a 2022 alum, so this is still pretty recent for me. And in the call for social change from the Black Lives Matter movement and others, really examining my own role and the change that I wanted to see. And so coming into it, I knew, I was in an executive MBA program in a classroom at Columbia. The class sort of started with like, if you're here, you've already succeeded in your life. You've already been there. And the demand from that class and then the subsequent course, which is an immersive program in which I played the role of a mentor to about 12 JTC students, really highlighted for me, like, this is an area where I could make an impact. It's a big world. I'm only one person. I lead a small company, about 80 people, but there are things that we can do that really will make a difference, at our own scale. And since then, and probably my enduring commitment to this movement is in helping other people like me kind of learn what it's like to come back. I developed a simulation program that maybe some of you have seen in one way or the other, that guides you in a sort of a computer game, like horrible Kafka-esque computer game of what it's like to return from incarceration.
Tyler?
Yeah, for me, it was personal. I've known people that have been impacted by incarceration and how opportunity stops, and they can't progress past that. And I've seen recidivism, I've seen substance abuse, and a lot of this from self-worth and not feeling like you're contributing or can contribute. And so the reason I focus on Justice Through Code is I get to invest my time in my service work helping others, changing their lives, and kind of opening some doors. I also have a loud voice where I work, and I can coalesce, and I can advocate, and I can promote for others to help get engaged. And early on, that was something that we focused on. We've had, I guess, over 30 mentors now from Amazon Web Services on the Justice Through Code program. Some of them repeat mentors. And everybody leaves that program, being a mentor, talking about how they have changed and how they see life differently and people differently, and they become advocates. And to see that continuation of change through not just the mentees, but also the mentors, it's really fulfilling.
And this for Makita, Austin was talking about his experience at Columbia Business School. We talk a lot about kind of our responsibility to the community. As a lifelong resident of New York City, what did it mean to you to be able to be accepted at a program at Columbia University, both from a personal aspect, but also getting access to the business networks and professional networks to have that support?
Well, it meant the world to me because I never dreamed of ever being a student at Columbia University. Like, Columbia University is this prestigious school that is for someone else, not for people like me, not for people who come from where I come from. Like, if someone was going to college like where I'm from, and which is Queens, New York, you hear I'm going to BMCC, I'm going to Queensborough. You don't hear I'm going to Columbia University. And I feel like that's because we don't feel we belong there. So having that opportunity was just like me, like I made it. I'm walking the grounds of Columbia University, and honestly, like the support and just the name itself, right? I feel like once people hear Columbia, it's like, oh my goodness, you went to Columbia? And it's like, yes, I did. And I belong at Columbia, so it really was a dream being realized, because I really just could not believe it, to be honest with you. Like, when I saw the program, I said I would give it a shot because I wanted an opportunity. But then when I thought about my chances and maybe, just coming out of prison and not feeling very good about myself, not feeling very confident because of my experiences leading up to going to Columbia. Like I said, I tried to apply for many jobs, and at the point of being hired, once they found out about my criminal conviction, they let me down. So I got used to being let down. I would still make the effort, but I was prepared to be let down. So once I did get into Columbia, it was like surreal to me. And then the networks there, I've had the opportunity to meet with amazing mentors who have shaped my life. And not only that, just being pointed in directions that have changed my life forever. I've went from Columbia, I got paired up with Emerging Works, which is a phenomenal program as well. And the mentors there, if I didn't have the mentors that I had at Columbia, Emerging Works, I wouldn't be where I am today. I was coming out of prison from doing a 9.5-year sentence. I hadn't even been around a computer. So I needed that extra support. And the folks that were coming out of Columbia, they were so passionate. And the folks that were coming out of Emerging Works, so passionate, so like, you don't think you have this, but we believe in you. And that was the driving force for me to be where I am today. So I feel like I owe everything that I am right now to this program and my experience at Columbia.
Thank you. Maria, Makita was talking a lot about kind of this sense of community, right, and what that means. You're mentioning the work with Next Chapter or Emergent Works, kind of this overall, space really where people can feel safe, right? So, and I'd love to hear more about kind of what it means to you to have that safe space and that community, especially that's focused, again, in this targeted way, right, on people that are either formerly incarcerated or have a criminal record for second chance employment.
Yeah, the community is very important because when I started my educational journey, I felt like I had branded ex-con on my forehead, and like, I was out incarcerated for 6 years, and just finding like first I found Project Rebound, and it was through a posting that they had for at California State University, Los Angeles, where they were asking people, like students, to see if they would volunteer and help people, formerly incarcerated students, part of their program, register for classes. And when I saw that, I was like, what? There's people like me out there, not having that representation. So syncing up with like JTC, Emergent Works, Project Rebound gave me a sense of belonging, a sense that I saw other people doing, completing getting their degrees. And, I came, during that journey, I ran into someone that I was incarcerated with, and she was just graduating from the same school I just was transferring into. So I was like, oh, if Lily can do it, I can do it, right? So having that space helps you become own your story and not be ashamed of it. Because before, if you would ask me about why I went to prison, what happened, I would bawl and tear. Now you can ask me what I went to prison for, and I'll tell you, but that's not who I am, right? I made a mistake, but that's not who I am now. So having those spaces and having community and having mentors and getting that support is just helps you succeed in life and anything you put your mind to, right? So I'm so super grateful. And, that's why I see other people going, oh, I'm going to go to grad school. Oh, yeah, I'm going to go to grad school too. So, it's a wonderful, community finding that space.
Thank you. This one's for Austin. We've heard from a lot of large companies today, right? You mentioned that you lead a company of around 80 employees. And I think a lot of companies kind of struggle at the smaller or mid-size as to how do we engage in this topic, right? Or they say, maybe we don't have the ability to hire somebody right now. And we actually look at this as Just Through Code as kind of a life cycle, right? Of how do we get people to that point of hiring, and also what types of other supports. You mentioned the personal support that you've offered in terms of educating other people, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about kind of how your company has engaged, how you're thinking about that as an executive leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does definitely connect to what I went through personally here at Columbia. The final project for the Immersive Block Week was a paper about what you are going to do, what you're going to take back to your company and put into action. And I think the most important thing, the first step is just to start talking about it. And we accomplished that. We had actually Eaton and a JTC alumni come and speak on a sort of like brown bag lunch with our staff. And that just got people talking and thinking about the concept. I think you'll find in most organizations, certainly most tech organizations and any business school, you'll find lots of people who are ready to be activated. If you just sort of say like, this is something that we care about, this is something that's important to us, then they'll raise their hands and say like, what about this? What about that? Our ultimate goal, which we have not yet reached, is to create apprenticeships for JTC students. But between here and there, for one thing, we cycle through workstation quality Apple laptops at a pretty rapid clip. And we used to eBay them, which was a complete pain for our operations team. Now we send them to JTC, and they hand them out to students that need them. Simple thing, small thing, and it's a win-win for us and for them. We've had a couple folks go through the technical mentorship side of JTC with more hopefully along the way, and we've adopted or are in the process of adopting various pieces of technology that we're a software development firm at our core, so this is again relatively easy for us. The key there too is like this isn't. We have to address this as work, right? This is a project for our team that we're doing like we would do for any of our clients. And that's, I think, what makes it successful, is that if you engage with this at the level of like, this is work, this is part of our jobs like anything else, we're doing it because it's important to us both personally and as a business, then people will say, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Thank you. Taylor, I know we've talked a lot about, and also we at Justice Through Code talk a lot about kind of what's the actual impact of the work that we're doing, right? Not just on the individuals, and not really just to look at this as kind of a social impact project, but how does this inform the way that you approach your work? How has this benefited your colleagues that have participated in the mentorship program, and just Amazon Web Services as a whole, as a partner for ours on the technical mentorship program?
There's a lot of ways it impacted me. So first, I realized I needed to go through more training around bias and unconscious bias, and to check my own biases and to kind of walk through that as I interact with my mentees. I learned that lesson, not in a hard way, but I learned it real quickly, that I was making assumptions about people that I shouldn't have been making. And so a little bit of introspection on how I would approach my work and my work with my mentees. Beyond that, working with others, my coworkers seeing my mentorship opened them to ask questions. What is this program? How can we get engaged? How can we help? And it was really being that gatekeeper to understanding and being able to answer questions, to talk about what my mentees are working on, to show them the GitHubs that my mentee had done. They're like, they built this? They did data visualizations in pandas? They absolutely did. I had to go learn pandas, and that was hard. I had to start learning things again to keep up with my mentees. That was a good lesson. Beyond that, as we started to look at how do we scale this and gather more mentees and help more people, and what's the impact going to be, we're very data-driven as an organization. It's real hard to quantify that. So I focused on the individual. What is this individual doing? Are they getting advanced? Both my mentees have now been promoted, so one from an intern to a full-time employee, and one from a full-time employee to the next level at Amazon. And I see this, and I see them going through it, and I'm still their mentor. I still work with them. I'm more their friend now, where we can talk about this stuff. And so for me, it's a lifelong impact. It's phone calls on Sunday after I leave brunch. Hey, how are you doing? Is everything okay with that reduction in force? Do you still have a job? Yes, I made that. It's been transformative.
Yeah. And for Makita and Maria, we've heard a lot about numbers today, right? Definitely from the business side of things, we want to focus, as Tyler said, right on the quantifiable aspect. But kind of again, centering this conversation and the human impact. What would you want employers to know about kind of why they should engage in second chance hiring?
I would say I would want employers to know that second chance hiring is not just for the individual, it's for everyone, right? When someone is released from prison and they don't have any opportunity, then what? Like affording a second chance to someone is making the community better. And number one, and number two, you're not just giving a chance to anybody. You're giving a chance to someone who's really, really working hard for this. Like, this is not a handout, it's not a freebie. And even as I say, I didn't imagine myself going to jail. I've been around in my community, so many people went to jail. It was a regular thing, and all of us have like some of commonalities, right? Which is trauma. My father was murdered when I was 7 years old. My mother came here from Jamaica. She didn't have a job. My house was shot up. Like, it was so many things that happened to me in life that put me in a position of fear, that put me in a position of low self-esteem, and made me feel that I had to protect myself and do certain things. But there are people who had worse experiences than me. And when you come home, what you do with yourself is a prime example of where you're going and what you want out of life. For me to become a software engineer, I had to work really, really hard. And there were folk that had to work harder than me who did not have a background like me, who did not have an experience like me. So with all of that dedication, with all of that saying, I want something new for me, for them to look for a chance and not be able to get it is not right. It's not right. It's not fair. It doesn't help anyone. And it also makes the community unsafe, if you ask me, right? Because we know what crime comes from, right? Lack of resources, boredom, a bunch of different things, right? If you have no opportunity, you put yourself in a position to feel like the world is against you. And we don't want that. We want to feel that everyone means something in our society, and especially folk who are dedicated to changing their lives. And from my change, so many lives have changed. And that can happen for so many other folk who are given a second chance to do something with themselves, to be an example in their community, to make someone feel that they can become a pilot or a software engineer or a doctor or go to Columbia University. The impact that have is immeasurable. And that's why I think second chances should be given.
So like Makita mentioned, giving an opportunity to someone with a criminal background, you'll be providing like sustainable employment, right? And not only that, you do like providing that does lower the recidivism rate. Sorry, I murdered it. But like you'll be helping lower that, right? And also by providing this, like, yeah, I was a high school dropout, drug addict, I got my associates in prison, and, now I can show my nephews, like, you don't have to go that route. You can actually become something, right? My nephew actually transferred into the same university I graduated from this year. And he's like, oh, like, Tia, you turned your life around. Like, I'm gonna be like you. So he's going into 3D game animation. Like, just seeing that and hearing that from them when before they're just like, everyone's like, oh, you're not gonna do anything with your life, right? So giving that opportunity, letting us have representation in our community is also big. Because every time I go into Homeboys, everyone thinks I'm a teacher or just someone, staff. And then when I'm like, oh, I'm formerly incarcerated, everyone starts paying attention. Then they start seeing themselves where I'm at. And that's, if my manager at Disney, my first manager, if he didn't give me that opportunity for my internship, I was getting rejected left and right. But he saw the potential. And now I'm a full-time employee there. I'm part of the Latinx Berg and outreach. I'm making, events for corporate connections for my campus for other students to come. And I'm still working on getting that internship opportunity for Project Rebound for someone that's formerly incarcerated with pursuing a computer science degree, right? So you give an opportunity to someone like us, we're gonna excel, right? How I hustled in there, I'm hustling out here. So yeah, that's.
Thank you. This is something I have not shared with Maria before, but I think one of the greatest pleasures of doing this work is seeing the success of people like Makita, Maria, being able to sit on this stage. We're in an Ivy League business school, right? The fact that we're able to have this discussion with these other speakers today is unbelievable, life-changing, right? Watching the pictures that you posted with your nephews at Disney World after getting your job, right? Like, that is why we're here today. That is why you make these commitments. Love to just hear from the group, if there's one thing that the audience can take away from today, what would it be, Austin?
Yeah, we heard that this story at JPMorgan started with Jamie Dimon, and I just want to emphasize that while this is all about the business case for second chance employment, it has, most places starts with the personal case and or human connection. And I just want you to know you can be the human connection for your organization. You can go back and say, this is important to me. This should be important to us, and I want to take some action here, and then start the journey.
Something that, so I'm going to give an example. During my internship, the CIO from my company, extended to all the interns to do a one-on-one. And I reached out. And she told me that if, like, before meeting me, she wouldn't have hired someone with a criminal background. But after and seeing like how I turned my life around, she gave me the green light to actually open up a internship program. So it's just giving that opportunity, giving a chance to someone is something like, please, and I don't want to beg, but it's just you give her saying that just gave me so much self-worth, and that's how I'm gonna end it.
I'd say for the influencers, hiring managers, and directors in the room, we are running out of senior technology talent, period. This is a pipeline of people that have a lot of ambition, that are willing to go the extra mile, to learn. The aptitude is through the charts. And for me, this is where we can make technology sustainable again, from a hiring perspective. We are just not keeping up. We can't keep paying people more. It's not going to work. The economics aren't there. We have to invest in early career and really invest in them, not just hire them. This is a 1.5-year investment. It's mentorship. It's making sure they're successful. It's all of those things. That's what we as leaders need to do or start to influence.
I say, give someone a second chance. It's for them, it's for you, it's for everyone. And if you can't give someone a second chance, if you can't get your employers to hire someone who has been justice impacted, join forces with other businesses, organizations who are mission partners, who want to see this happen. I work for Checkers, and Checker is a fair chance company, and I'm so proud to be a part of Checkers because of that. Like, I sought Checkers because I wanted to be aligned with someone who believes in what I believe in. And as a Checker employee, I feel good because I don't feel like I'm hiding behind anything. I can say, yes, I did time. Yes, I feel this way. Yes, I don't know something, right? And they understand because they know where I came from, right? And giving someone a second chance and being a part of an organization that does that will also do what Checkers does for me. And I say, get involved in any way that you can. Make donations to organizations who are doing this work, Justice Through Code, for example. We need all the support that we can get to see this through. And somebody's family depends on this. My family depends on this. Like, when I see my daughter now, she knows that she has the potential to be somebody. And my absence made her feel that she didn't have that potential. My prison sentence may have affected my daughter, who never committed a crime, more than it even affected me. But now she knows. Look at my mom. She went through this. She served a 9.5-year sentence, and she came home, and she was able to become something. And even when I felt like I didn't have a mom and everything was against me, and even though my life is not exactly where it is today, her life is not even where my life is today, she knows that she can do it. She can rise above her situation and become somebody
from the opportunity that someone said someone like Makita deserves. So you be that someone too. Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions for anybody in the panel. Lana, if you could come grab the mic to, oh, actually, you're good. Yeah.
Pretty loud, so I don't know if I need it. All right. Perfect. Thank you to everyone being up here. I personally have a father who experienced some of these same issues that you've gone through. Can you talk a little bit to the crowd about what you've done to bring the same energy to every interview, right? You talk about people giving you a chance, but it seemed like you were giving them a chance to get into their environment and show them the change that you can make. Were there any things that you use to help build you up or bring that same energy to every interview and not shut down and go to your corner and stay there? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Okay. So my sister told me the exact same thing. That she's a senior software engineer for a gaming company. So when I was interviewing for my internship and getting rejected a lot, she came up to me. She's like, "You're strong." She's like, "Because after the first interviews, I would have given up." And I'm like, "I'm learning, and I'm going to be better for the next interview." And rejection after rejection, and I knew the company that I was going to get hired with was going to see that, though, because all my jobs were part of Project Rebound, and that's an organization that offers support for formerly incarcerated students pursuing a degree. And so I just kept showing up. I made that commitment, showing up, and eventually, I interviewed with Disney. And I didn't think they were going to hire me because Disney, but they gave me the opportunity, and me practicing and interviewing with all these other companies, I knew my what is it, that speech, my intro speech, so I had it memorized, and it was just like flowing. The answers they were asking me, the questions they were asking me were the same, similar to the other ones. So I already had a little outline. And so yeah, that's the energy. You just have to keep going. I'm like, people are going to say no, but that's the worst they can do. Just say no.
My name is Douglas Reed. Actually, I'm a retired federal correction officer. One of the things I want to ask the panel is, one of the things that I had to learn was empathy, especially understanding a second chance. What do you think is most important based on your transition for people involved in law enforcement or just the community to let us know how to show the empathy and respect for each other?
I would say, as far as empathy is concerned, a lot of the times when you are looking at yourself, so let me give you an example. I had a job one time. I was working at the Department of Buildings as a legal assistant, and I remember when I first got to the job, I had like such great customer service skills, I gotta tell you, right? And I used to work at Geico, and they had like a really intense customer service training. And I remember when I got to the city agency, right? I was so like, "Thank you for holding." Like just being so friendly and so nice. And I remember the borough manager came to me and she said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "Why are you so nice? And why are you no, you need to be more serious. You need to be more aggressive." And I'm just like, okay, didn't think I should have that type of attitude here. But as many of you know, in a lot of city agency, there is an attitude, right? There is a way that people conduct themselves that doesn't seem very friendly or very, customer service driven. And at some point, I started to adopt those ways, right? I started to adopt those ways, and people would come into the office. I'm like, "Wait a minute, step out, step back." And this guy came to me, he says, "Listen, why are you behaving like this? Like, what if you had to come here and do this job? Would you want someone to treat you like that?" And I thought about it, and I'm just like, no, I would not.
And I did not. And now I'm becoming something that I never was, to fit in or to suit a culture, an existing culture that was not positive, right? And I say the same thing when you think about empathy. Think about yourself. Think about what you would want. Think about you in your human condition and form, making a mistake and having to go through this, right? Because just like I told you before, I lived in poverty. I lived in a criminal area. I did not think I was going to go to prison, but I did, right? But if I had an attitude as a correction officer, if I ever became one, that I would never go to prison. I don't care. I lived in this neighborhood. And then I treat people like they're not worthy, or like I can never make a mistake. Like, think of how different things would be, right? You have to look at it like you can make a mistake. You can be in the same shoes that someone else is in, and how would you want to be treated? How would you want your mom treated? How would you want your son treated? How would you want your daughter treated? How would you want the people you love treated when they make a mistake? And that's what I do to develop empathy when I feel it's lacking.
Can I add something? So the last thing the CEO from the prison, like I thought she was cool. She was my boss for like 3 years. And the last thing she told me was, "You'll be back in a year." And that I wasn't going to amount to, so that always stung because oh my, I'm sorry. That stung. And even when I was like applying to school and stuff like that, my parole officers were just like, "What are you wasting your time for?" So I would ask like CEOs, parole officers, if I'm thinking, of going back to school or pursuing something, encourage that individual, because, yeah, just encourage them. Sorry.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I want to ask something right now is for us all to stand up and give this incredible panel a round of applause.
What a great panel, Maria and Makeda in particular. Just a huge thank you to that entire panel, but particularly those two women who I think give us not only inspiration, but drive us toward we need to do this at scale. So as we transition to our next panel, which we're going to do now, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma. The governor will be joined in conversation with Dan Wang, the Lambert Family Professor of Social Enterprise at Columbia. Governor Stitt's going to share more about how he has taken on second chance issues in his state and what other governors can do partnering with business to achieve positive outcomes. We started out this morning with the CEOs. We then hit the operational focus with the chief human resource officers. Now we've talked about individuals who are directly impacted. If we're going to get to scale, one of the great and best places, I think, to talk about scale is at the state level. And I cannot think of a better governor to bring here today than Governor Stitt, who, even though the First Lady of Oklahoma is not with him, she's clearly a key partner in trying to driving this agenda in the state. So please join me in welcoming the governor and Dan to the stage.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful welcome. If you were here for the last session, you got one dimension of how important this issue is on a personal level. And let me just say that it is an absolute honor, Governor Stitt, to have you join us today, because although some of you can see from your programs, looking at the bio of the governor, as well as all of the members involved, what you might notice first is that this is not the governor, this is not a governor who's had a typical path to public service. In terms of Governor Stitt's background, this is his first foray into elective public officialdom, but because before that, he founded and was CEO of Gateway Mortgage and Banking. Believe me, by the way, if you want to talk banking, you are in the right place. So if you want to switch gears, we can certainly do that. But we are here today to talk about something that's in many ways much more pressing. And what I wanted to do was to begin by kind of addressing those who are in attendance here. Because what we have here today is that we have a diversity of members in the audience, ranging from executives to policy officials to academics and researchers to students and members of the press. Yet at the same time, for many people in the room, this issue of second chance hiring and reentry is deeply personal as well. Either they themselves have been impacted by the criminal justice system or they're close to somebody who has. We'll get to the details of how your administration has tackled this question policy-wise, but I'm wondering if we might begin by asking you to share a little bit about your personal motivation for making this such a priority in your administration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. Can y'all hear me okay? They mic'd me just one second before I walked out of here. But it's an honor to be here with you. And so when I became governor, I'd never ran for public office before and just felt called to run and get involved. I'm a fourth generation Oklahoman. And as you mentioned, I come from the business world. I started a company with $1,000 in a computer shortly after college and grew it. We have over 1,000 employees today. And I saw my state struggling. And so ran and ended up winning and was sworn in 2019. Well, I tried to take a business approach to a lot of different things. So when I first got there as governor, I realized that Oklahoma, I put a governor's scorecard together and started tracking all these different metrics. And just like in business, I feel like that if this company can do it, we can do it. And I would always challenge my team, if they're doing it, why can't we do it? And now as governor, I had a vision to be a top 10 state. Let's be top 10 in everything that we do. If Texas can do it, if Florida can do it, if New York can do it, if California can do it, we can do it. So whether it's transportation or infrastructure or healthcare or anything. So back to the criminal justice piece. And I found out that Oklahoma was last place. We were 50th out of all 50 states in incarceration rates. I was like, that doesn't make sense. I said, I know Oklahomans, and either we have worse people than everybody or we have bad policies. And I knew it was bad policy. So I went about to transform the criminal justice system. And today, we have 5,000 fewer people incarcerated than we did the day I took office. I've closed 4 prisons, 2 private prisons, saved hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, and gave second chances to tons and tons of people. And so just really, really proud of the work that we've done. And I know we'll talk about some of that specifically, but, criminal justice reform before I got there, the year before I got there, 2018, the former governor had done a commutation and they thought it was just groundbreaking. It was 21 people, okay? Well, most governors wait, and that was her last year, most governors wait to the very end of their term to do any kind of meaningful, commutations. Well, my first year, 2019 as governor, I took 530 low-level drug offenders and basically said, we're going to do a commutation and we're going to get them all out of prison. And so we did it the right way. I got the DAs involved. Anybody that had pled down to a simple possession, we kind of kicked out. But it ended up being 419. I had no idea at the time. My team and my staff told me it was the largest commutation in U.S. history in 2019. And so that kind of set us on this trajectory. And now Oklahoma is leading the nation. We're the #1 in lowest recidivism rate. That's the rate that people go and reoffend and go back into prison. So it's some of those programs that we put in place to have meaningful second chance and reforms kind of behind the wire. So excited to talk about that. But that's kind of shaped me, is just kind of looking at, well, what do these states do? How does Oklahoma rank? And I have a scorecard where I put, we're the 25th. Like you have to take a realistic look. Where are you at as a state, whatever the category? What do you need to be 25th? And then what do you need to be top 10? And so we look at that in my management meetings every single week, where we're at and how do you push. So in business, you're going to improve in what you measure. And so by getting that in front of my agencies and knowing that's a priority, it's just amazing what we've been able to do.
I think that resonates so much with a lot of the students who are here, especially those who are from the business school, and kind of approaching it based on incentives, based on the resources that you have, and also based on the constraints as well. That's where I'd like to kind of pick up on some of what you said, to dig a little deeper in terms of where Oklahoma was in 2019. You had just kind of said that this was a policy issue. What did it look like in 2019? What were you starting with in terms of engaging in this criminal justice reform? Could you give us some examples?
You mean what was the feel in the state,
Yes,
or
exactly.
what?
Yeah.
I think, and one of the things I'm really, really proud of, I've talked to businesses and I've talked to the corrections department, and they just said, Governor, you have changed the culture. And before you got here, people wouldn't even hire, people that have been formerly incarcerated to work at a fast food place. So you've changed that narrative through some of your policies. We've done, occupational licensing reforms, Senate, so to make sure that we want to make sure that people can go get a job after they get out of prison. So we're doing all those things to kind of take away that stigmatism, so really it's a workforce issue that we can talk more about. But I think we've changed some of that narrative in Oklahoma and had people talk about it, because I don't believe it's not mutually exclusive to talk about public safety and criminal justice reform. And so we can talk about both of them. I've given our law enforcement a 30% pay increase. We're going to promote law enforcement in Oklahoma. And at the same time, we believe that there are folks that we need to lock up, and I coined this term, we need to lock up people that we're mad at, or excuse me, we don't need to lock up people we're mad at, we need to lock up people that we're afraid of, and so that's kind of a little change in how I think historically things have happened in states across the U.S.
I think that's really, that signals a reform mindset in so many ways. At the same time, you've kind of rallied your entire administration around this as well. I was so heartened to read that the First Lady of Oklahoma is also involved as well. And she was involved in creating an initiative for the mass commutation event as well. Could you talk a little bit about your wife Sarah's HOPE initiative?
Sure, absolutely. Well, when we did that massive commutation in 2019, we realized that people have to have a driver's license, they have to have a Social Security card, they have to find their birth certificate, and all these problems with when people got out of prison to get back into the workforce. And in Oklahoma, we're a state of 4 million people. We're the 28th largest state population-wise. And in our state, 6,700 people get released from prison every single year, right? And so 95% of the people in prison will be our neighbors at some point. So the whole point is, how do we get them back into the workforce? We know as citizens, we know that God's created everybody differently, but we're supposed to be created to be part of a team and to work hard and to be engaged in life. And that's where, if we can get people into the workforce, have meaningful work, then we know they're not going to reoffend. And so that was kind of what was driving us. So we put, it's called the Sarah Stitt Act, number one. Other states have copied it now. And it was to bring these services before people get out of prison, make sure they have a driver's license, make sure we connect them with housing. How do you get your kids back from DHS? All these kind of things that we've started working before they get out of prison, which we can talk more about. And then the Hope Foundation is something that, and I got to back up and tell you a little bit about my wife's story. So I grew up in Norman, Oklahoma. My wife grew up in Tulsa. We've been married, it'll be 25 years this May. Y'all can think of a good, that's another thing I got to put on my list to do. I got to figure that out. So Sarah grew up in North Tulsa, which is a real kind of rough area. And her dad never made more than $13,000 a year. And he ran a drug rehab, kind of a mission work. So super rough area, not a lot of opportunity. And so my wife grew up with the attitude that, like, what could go wrong today? Like, that was her attitude. That's just kind of the environment she grew up in. I grew up in a home that it was like I woke up in the morning and what can I accomplish? What can go right for me today? And so Sarah has shared with me about we have to give hope to the next generation all across Oklahoma. And so this professor at the University of Oklahoma wrote a book called The Science of Hope. And so Sarah that's her initiative. And hope is not a feeling. Hope is a science that can be learned, and the idea that your future can be better than your present. And how do we teach young people that may not have that attitude, that there are pathways and there is a path that you can go to a better future, a better life, no matter what your background is. So we're doing that in Department of Corrections. We're doing that in our universities. We're doing it in DHS. Department of Human Services now, it's got 6,300 employees, and we're doing this Science of Hope. And now turnover has decreased by double digits just because we're pouring into our employees. And then we're doing that in our school system. So the Science of Hope is something we're really excited about, to bring hope and to teach that to the next generation and really to our employees. And then happy employees, happy correctional officers are going to be pouring in and doing a better job of giving hope to our inmates coming out. So all that kind of works together in our state. So really proud of Sarah. Other states are starting to pass that, and she's traveling and speaking on this as well.
That's incredibly inspiring. I think that resonates with me and also with many people in this room emotionally. If it's okay, I'd love to shift into the nitty-gritty of actually getting policy work done. This is something that you've made a hallmark of your agenda in your administration as governor of Oklahoma. In your first year alone, in your first administration, you passed several pieces of legislation that had an immediate impact. Could I ask you to describe your process for strategizing, making sure that this impact was out there? How did you pick the first pieces that you would endorse? How did you think about that whole issue and working with policymakers and legislators?
Yeah. Well, first off, to me, a lot of it is common sense. It's back to the scorecard. It's back to comparing yourself to other states. What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And one piece of policy that I think is interesting for us as governors to consider and policymakers is the fees. So when people paid their debt, they got out of prison, I found out that just from campaigning around the state, I would meet people that they get out of prison and now they have $10,000 in debt, or $20,000 in some cases. And so I started looking at that. I was like, well, okay, guys, explain, where does that money go? What's that for? Well, it's not for restitution. That $20,000, it was called fines, fees, and court costs. And then I found out that the judges and the district attorneys, the way they paid their pension plans, their salaries, was on fines, fees, and court costs. I said, well, that's a perverse incentive. You've got judges that are incentivized now to fine. And so I went back to the legislature and I said, hey, this makes no sense, okay? You can't incentivize somebody to do heavy fines, right? So let's take all fines and fees and court costs. That doesn't go directly to the judges anymore. It goes to the legislature. And then legislature, you appropriate the correct amount to run our DAs and we need a court system and we need all that, but we're not gonna have a perverted system, right? So I got them to change that. And really it's just common sense. And then I had a lot of favor with, I think, the legislature, and so I was able to change that. Well, now I'm trying to eliminate the fines, fees, and court costs, because it makes no sense getting out and then saddling people with it might as well be $1 million. I talk to these people, and they're like, Governor, I can't pay $10,000 back. I'm going to get a minimum wage job or whatever, and it's just overwhelming. And so we're trying to make sure that you use common sense, right? And so that's something that we're really proud of. 25% of Oklahomans need some kind of occupational licensing for jobs. And so there was a stigmatism on hiring, and then there was a lot of these old laws that wouldn't allow them to get an occupational license or become licensed to do this or that. And so we went through and we passed a law in 2019 that said, hey, we're going to open that up. When you get out of prison, you've paid your debt, you should be able to get a license, okay? Unless it's, public safety concern or if it's a financial crime in the financial. But then last year, we actually passed a law that said, we want the licensing authority to actually look deeper. Just because you think that they should be precluded from getting this license, we want you to think about the time it expired. Did something happen in college? Did something happen 20 years ago? What were the circumstances? So it's not an automatic, even for some of those other types of felonies. Expungement reform, we're going through those things to keep folks from having to pay $5,000 to $20,000. People don't know a lot of times how to navigate the system. And so one of my favorite things to do as governor is when I sign when I sign pardons and I'm able to call them and just say, hey, and these people have been out of prison for 10 years or 20 years, and they just want to get their life back and have that kind of put behind them and be able to go hunting with their kids, because you're not allowed to have a gun if you're a felon. And so we want to expunge that stuff. So, so by calling them and saying, hey, this is the governor, and they're just shocked, I'm calling them and I say, hey, I've got your pardon application on my desk. I want you to know that I'm approving this today, and this is the first day of the rest of your life. They start crying, they thank me, and it's one of the funnest things that I get to do as governor, is call and make those calls. And they made a mistake 20 years ago, and they just said, Governor, I will not let you down. This is something that it's for my kids, and I want to move on and just kind of put that piece behind me. And so you literally are expunging their past record, and so those are fun.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. So much of making these types of decisions at a high level, especially in business, anytime you make a budget decision, a leadership decision, you have to justify it by saying who benefits, right? Who benefits and what a cost or constraint. And as governor, you have to do the same as well. So much of what you've talked about up until here is the beneficiary are those who have their records expunged or who are getting out and have a clear path to reintegration, and it makes a huge difference in their lives. But another stakeholder that benefits could be potentially employers who are based in Oklahoma. And so taking a step back, I'm wondering if you can give some insight on how second chance employment and the policies that have been part of your administration helps meet these workforce needs. What have you heard from employers, and what's been kind of some of the questions you've had to navigate around that?
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. From a commerce perspective, my Secretary of Commerce and our team, anytime they're recruiting companies, Oklahoma, we're top 10 right now in the country in people moving to our state, not per capita, but true numbers. People are moving there. I could go on and give you my Oklahoma sales pitch, but we'll save that for later. But it's the right place to be located if you're a manufacturer, if you're setting up shop. We're dead center located in the middle of the U.S. Our electricity cost, one quick thing on that. We have the most affordable electricity cost to the consumer and business of any state in the country, like 11 out of the last 14 quarters, because we have more of everything. Everybody thinks of Oklahoma as just an oil and gas state. We're so proud of our oil and gas industry, but we're also, we're like number 4 in oil production, number 3 in natural gas, but we're also number 2 in wind energy production. Most people don't know that about Oklahoma. We're one of only 4 states that 40% of our energy comes from renewables. That's why Google has their largest data center located in Oklahoma. So for all those reasons, we're being very attractive to companies. But the first thing that companies ask me when they're looking to relocate is, can we get the workforce? I met with Elon Musk, and we were second place. They ended up doing a plant down in Texas, and we were number 2 to that. We're really close on a couple huge battery factories. But they always want to talk about workforce. Well, 6,700 people are getting out of prison, okay? So how do we train them and get them working very, very quickly? We have major trucking companies in Oklahoma. One of the trucking CEOs came to me and said, Governor, I want you to know that our number 1 highest paid W-2 employee last year was a formerly female incarcerated person in Oklahoma. So we have worked with trucking industry to say, hey, if you need CDL drivers, Coca-Cola plants and all the distribution, they need CDL drivers, which is commercial drivers. And so we've set up CDL training behind the wire. So when they get out, they're ready to go, because that's a shortage. We have work release programs, so minimum security prisons. We have road construction crews. We'll go in and actually bring people out of prison and actually start them working 6 months before they get out. And so then they start to get acclimated in. So our career techs, we're setting up more career techs. We're setting up manufacturing behind the line. So again, the whole point is these folks are going to be out of prison. Let's make sure that they get a good job. If you don't have a good job when you get out, you're destined for failure. You don't feel good about yourself. We need people engaged in achieving and being part of a team and working. And so that's where life is fun. If you're sitting at home and you're not engaged in things, man, it's not very fun. You need to be part of a team. So we're trying to encourage people and are trying to break that stigma to have these companies work with Department of Corrections to tell us what we need. We have $1 billion. I just set up our fiber office And so our goal is to have, 98% connectivity by 2028 all across the state of Oklahoma. We have about $1 billion that we're spending in fiber. And so we need splicers, we need technicians, we need people that know how to put that all in the ground. And so we're actually putting that behind the wire to make sure that we can get those folks and get that workforce to meet the needs of the companies that are coming in to lay that fiber all across Oklahoma.
That is so interesting to hear. There's clearly so much opportunity for, you mentioned the 6,700 people that are kind of released back into society every year in Oklahoma. Can I ask a follow-up on how employers see the kinds of key pieces of legislation, the work you're doing to reduce the barriers to reattain occupational licensees, these kinds of policies? How do they view that? I'm sure some are incredibly welcoming of it. Have you encountered any challenges before, and what can your office do in terms of stepping in and making Oklahoma more welcoming to potential employers like Elon Musk or others who want to be in the state?
Well, first off, I think that a lot of it's an educational piece. You're talking about educating employers about not being afraid to employ. I think it's an educational piece, and I think it's a training piece, getting them connected with DOC, and then seeing successes from their competitors, and also the philanthropic part of, hey, I'm really helping give someone a second chance and improving someone's destiny. And you improve their destiny, you're going to improve their children's destiny, you're going to improve their grandkids, you're going to change the trajectory of that family by giving them a second chance, putting the right culture. Most companies that I know, they want to take care of their employees, they want to take care of the environment, they want to take care of their customers. And so I think when you get the right companies and the right CEOs and the right leadership, the management team, they want to change the trajectory of their communities and also their employees. And so I think it's just a natural fit. We have tons of companies that are very interested in doing that. And I just have to, a lot of times they just don't know. And so you have to connect them with our corrections folks. And then you have to, as governor, I try to put business people running my different state agencies that think differently than the traditional bureaucracy. And so the guy that ran my technology at my company, he now runs corrections. And I said, hey, you need to come. Here's how I get people to come serve with me in state government. I tell all these CEO types, I'm like, listen, you can never complain about state government again if you don't come serve with me for 2 years. And I recruit them. And so, like, I'm in an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And so I've got like 10 YPOers. And these are people that are, publicly traded CEOs, and I guilt them into coming and taking off from their high-paying jobs and come and serve with me for 2 years. And I think that's what our founders envisioned. They never thought that you would, sorry I keep messing with this, they just threw this on and it's like falling off my ear.
You're good.
But I think our founders never envisioned politics to be a profession, right? They thought you would be a successful farmer or rancher or business person or teacher, and you would leave that for a time. You'd go serve your state or your country, and then you come back to the private sector. That's exactly what I promised Oklahomans I would do. And that's how I tell people, hey, you got to come serve with me, because these jobs, DHS is 6,300 people. Corrections, mental health, we spend $450 million. These are big CEO roles, and you have to be a leader. You got to set the right team. You got to be able to recruit the right people, set that policy. And so that's kind of my philosophy on trying to improve outcomes all across the state, and doing it efficiently and effectively, and protecting taxpayers' money is kind of how I think about things.
That is so refreshing to hear, because one really interesting part about teaching MBA students, as I've done here at Columbia Business School, is that the misconception is that getting a degree in business school is finance and accounting. But what you really learn is that business has a huge role to play in society. And when folks actually enter into leadership positions, they have to think about everything around their businesses and beyond the boundaries of their firm. And in many cases, that means working with policymakers and folks in government, elected officials. As you were thinking about some of the policies that were part of your agenda involving second chance hiring, can I ask, how did you bring the business community into that process? Did you kind of listen to the needs of business leaders? How did they shape the way that you thought about policies and their needs? And how did you craft kind of your influence in legislation, over the legislation on this? I mean, what was that process like working with them? And did any resist? Were any kind of very welcoming of that, inviting of that?
Well, I think, you know, the business community, they think like I do. It's just like common sense. And one of my favorite stories, this happened in 2019, never been governor, never ran for office, been a CEO. And so I get in there, my first day on the office, my general counsel comes to me and says, Governor, we've got to review some, what are they called? Extraditions. And I'm like, okay, what's an extradition? And they said, well, we've got to bring some prisoners back from this state back to Oklahoma. I said, okay, let me look at it. And what's the deal here? What'd they do? Well, this is a misdemeanor drug charge from that we want to bring them back from Wisconsin. And I'm like, a misdemeanor drug charge? I said, what's the fine for that? And they go, well, it's $500. And I was like, okay. I said, how much is it going to cost me to go to Wisconsin to bring them back? And they said, well, sir, it's going to be like $10,000. And I'm like, why would I spend $10,000 to bring somebody back to pay a $500 fine? I said, leave the druggie in Wisconsin. I said, we don't want them. And I said, I'm not going to waste taxpayer dollars to go do that. And the whole world melted down. Nobody had ever said no, right? So that's just I think the business community, when I explain things like that, I'm like, everything I do is just kind of common sense. We're not going to bring somebody back for something stupid like that, right? And so again, you just look at trying to be conservative with taxpayer dollars, and you're trying to believe in second chances. So I think the business community trusts me on those things and sees kind of how I approach stuff. But you said something else. I believe that, you know, my dad was a pastor in Norman, and that's how I grew up. And so I always struggled early in my career, like when I was in my 20s and 30s, like, am I doing enough? Because I always saw my dad like ministering to people and being engaged with, and I was like, well, I'm just over here, you know, just running my business, making money and doing this. But what I realized over time is we can have such an impact on our own employees and our own culture. And so I see that now more than anything. And so we have corporate chaplains in our company that are actually ministering, and they've done weddings and funerals. And when somebody's struggling with their 16-year-old daughter, I've got 6 children. So if anybody has any advice on teenage daughters, I've got 2 of them right now. But I think that business can be engaged in changing the lives of their employees and being involved in their community. And that's just what we do. We try to do. We try to be good citizens. We're trying to take care of, and we're trying to give second chances in this specific thing that we're talking about. And I think we're doing it very, very well. We could always do better, but I think we're moving the needle for a lot of Oklahomans.
That's great to hear. It's clear that kind of your business past has enhanced your kind of ability to govern now as a public official. But speaking of being a public official, this being your kind of first foray into that, having been reelected as well, you've also had to deal with your share of critics about your politics on criminal justice reform, and they often raise the issue. You've already touched on this a little bit about community safety. For example, and I read some of your kind of interviews about this. In an interview last year with Arnold Ventures, you said, normally a Republican does not come out and support criminal justice reform, but I tell people, yes, we're going to be a law and order state, but we're also going to talk about fairness. So how do you balance reform with these concerns, sometimes from within your own party?
Yeah. Well, first, and I truly believe that. I believe we can be a law and order state, and we can also be about fairness. And all the things we do, I think, are just kind of about fairness. And so we have lowered incarceration rates dramatically. We have saved the taxpayers money. We have nonviolent and violent crime is actually down in Oklahoma. Recidivism, we're leading the nation right now. Number one, our recidivism rate is 16.5, and the national average is like 33%. Because technical violations, I've stopped all that nonsense. And so, you know, you're always going to have critics. And so in my election, especially a Republican governor in a red state, they tried to take me out. My opponents tried to take me out, and they go, oh, what can we take this guy out on? Let's get him on criminal justice reform. They spent $50 million against me, okay? $50 million in a governor's race in New York is probably not that big of a deal. But our overall race was about a $10 million race, and they spent $50 million in negative ads and campaigns against me. Put that in equivalent. That's about, based on the media buys in Oklahoma, that's like spending $600 million in like the Virginia governor's race, just to put it in comparison. And I ended up winning by more than I did in 2018. So again, I believe that people see right through it, and they say they want second chances, and they believe, and I would just tell Oklahomans, hey, if we're last place in something, this makes no sense, okay? And so we can absolutely be a law and order state. We can support law enforcement, and as well as have fairness in our criminal justice system. And so they can see all the things I'm doing, and we ended up winning by more than anything. So I tell Republican governors and Democratic governors, hey, we need to put politics aside and just do what's right in our state. And so that's what we're trying to do.
So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit more using our remaining time. I know we have about 10 minutes left to talk about both of these issues. And you had mentioned a couple of things about how you have to kind of bridge many gaps in your position as governor. And for me, it goes without saying that the most common refrain you hear in politics, if you spend too much time watching the news or scrolling Twitter today, is that we're living through one of the most polarized times in American history. I think that's up for debate because, well, American history has been through a lot. But it is true that there are many different opinions that exist along the political spectrum. And suffice it to say, we're in a time where it's really challenging to find an issue for which you can rally bipartisan support. We're not here to talk about all of those issues, but it appears that second chance reform and hiring is one issue where members from all types of ideologies can seemingly rally around. Can you talk about specifically why you think that is? There's so few of these kinds of overlaps that we can talk about now, but why is this particular issue one that can bring people together?
Yeah, I think, second chance just kind of, it speaks to the goodness of humanity. We all want to see people get a second chance. And then mercy and forgiveness and grace, what does that look like in the criminal justice system? And then I always go back to, they're going to get out at some point. 95% of the people incarcerated today, I think in all states, are going to be our neighbors at some point. So let's make sure we train them and we get them into the best position possible to have, a great future and a great hope. So I think that just humanity as a whole, we love those stories where people can reform and they can turn their lives around, and your past does not define you. And that's what I tell everybody. It doesn't matter what you've done in your past. This is the first day of the rest of your life, and you can absolutely turn it around. And at the same sense, this is the first day of the rest of our lives too. We can drop out of college, we can make mistakes, we can actually go the other direction from the people sitting in this room. You've got your whole future in front of you, and you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. And it's the same thing for them. They don't let our past define us. So I think that's an issue that we can rally around regardless of politics. And when I'm in Oklahoma, always talking to our folks, I always tell them, I kind of make the joke that let Washington, D.C. play politics, right? I said, we're all Oklahomans. Let's just make Oklahoma a top 10 state, right? So to me, it shouldn't be political. It should just be doing the right thing, and it's about fairness. And so that's kind of how I lead, and I believe that shouldn't be political.
Mm-hmm. Related to this, you also sit on the National Governors Association's executive committee. It would be great if we could have you talk a little bit about your interaction with other governors about this issue around second chance employment and hiring, and issues surrounding the labor market, workforce development more broadly. When you meet with other governors, what are you hearing? How do you talk about this work with other governors who might be considering implementing some of these policies themselves? Their states face different challenges as well. They have different kind of supporters and detractors too. Can you share your thoughts on how governors can work with other governors like yourself to work on this issue? What does that look like?
Well, I think I would encourage them to get their business community and get their education community and the Department of Corrections together in a room and to talk about, how are we training the workforce? How are we training DOC folks that are getting out, people that are getting out of prison? And how do we coordinate that, right? There's a lot of dollars. There's a lot of ants on this ant pile. And I believe it's just a resource allocation issue. So career techs in our state, how do we take, if they're trying to, if their whole focus is to educate a workforce, well, let's put a couple of those professors behind the wire and let's figure out what the business community needs, and let's make sure we're starting to train them. And so I think we can, by coordinate that, also church groups and NGOs and different folks, we want them all working with the corrections folks before they get out of prison. So those are all things I try to connect. I have this initiative called Be a Neighbor, and I'm trying to get my churches, my nonprofits, where government can't solve these issues. I tell people all the time, you can't pass a law in Oklahoma City and fix some of these social issues. You have to have neighbors walking with neighbors, right? And so I tell my churches, like aging out of foster care, 16 to 18, you're aging out, right? You're probably not going to show up and get adopted at that point. So at 18, they're going to be aging out. Cleveland County, where I grew up in Norman, Oklahoma, has 8 kids that are fixing to age out of foster care. Well, there's about 200 churches in Cleveland County. And then there's nonprofits that are around this issue. So I'm trying to connect them saying, hey, you guys need to adopt these 8 and get them on a good track, because the statistics, if you age out of foster care, you're in prison, you're homeless over 50% of the time within a couple years. So we're trying to make sure that we connect those two. But I think connecting the DOC with the education career techs is really, really important. The other thing I tell them is just look at the statistics and dig in. And I got to tell you this. So I pushed and pushed and pushed. And if you have to meet with your parole officer, right? Everybody thinks, well, let's go meet with the parole officer. That's a good thing. So I started asking the questions. Is the parole officer, what's the recidivism rate if you meet with a parole officer versus not meeting with the parole officer? Well, in business, if you ask one question, they'll spin me in a circle. Oh, Governor, we'll get back with you. And then, they think I'm going to forget about it. So I ask them the next time, yeah, we're working on it. And they, blah, 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 blah. They fancy words. And I get, what? What'd y'all just tell me? So I go back and back and back. And finally, I get the information I'm looking for because they don't want to give it to me. If you meet with the parole officer, you are more likely to go back to prison than if you don't meet with them. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, I want y'all to set me up a meeting. I want to go in. Don't tell them I'm coming. I want to watch an interaction between a person coming out that's meeting with their parole officer and the parole and the parole officer, and then the inmate, or not the inmate, the
Parolee.
Parolee. That's right, parolee. So they're like, "Oh, are you serious, Governor?" I said, "Yeah." So it was D-class office space, terrible office space. Anyway, so we go in. It's this big building, and I thought they were going to be meeting with a counselor. Right? That was my vision. They're going to go meet with the parole officer. They're going to be counseling them and helping them. Blah blah blah. Well, it was an armed officer. So the armed officer sitting there across the table. It was a minority woman. I was sitting in there, and it just wasn't a good interaction. They were like, well, I need you to do this, this, and this. You're going to go to AA. You're going to go to this meeting. I want you to do 3 days a week because you messed up here. And I asked the lady, I said, how'd you get here? Her son had driven her. And she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And he said, okay, here, sign this piece of paper. And so she's, oh, okay. She signs it. I'm like, hang on, time out. Do you even know what you just signed? And so I think that's the whole system just over time, government entities, the mission creep just gets crazy, right? And what was set up as a good thing over time starts being bureaucratic, and it's only designed for them to grow and them to increase, and they forget their mission, right? So we need to relook at that. I'm not saying we don't need oversight. But for example, my brother's an attorney, and he has a title company over in Tulsa, and he employs some people that have been incarcerated. Well, he's got to give them a day off to drive all the way back to Oklahoma City to go meet with the parole officer. Well, with FaceTime, with different technology, government needs to just say, hey, do you just need to do a credit check, so to speak, or are they working? Let's call their HR department. Let's do a FaceTime. Let's make sure if they have a job, let's not make it harder for them to take off work to drive 4 counties away to meet with someone. So I just encourage people to actually ask questions and start unpeeling that onion and asking what's happening. And so I think there can be a lot of reforms there that I'm trying to work through to make sure that we can shorten that period of time. It can be virtual, or do they have to? If they've already served their time, why do you have to keep going here for another couple years, making it harder and harder? They've already made some poor decisions. They're not the best decision maker. We need to help them and not saddle them with more requirements, okay? I would hate that too, right? I would hate to have to go show up and talk to someone once a week. So I get it. So I'm just trying to think outside the box, trying to reform a system. If not me, then who's going to do it? If not now, I don't know when it's going to happen. I always tell my team, guys, if we're not going to do it, the next administration is not going to do it. Let's fix everything we can while we're here. We're here for a short time.
I think it's that spirit and urgency that's kind of the origin of why you have accomplished so much to date. We just have a couple minutes left, and so my last question for you is what's next for Oklahoma? What are the next issues on the agenda that deserve priority when it comes to second chance employment and hiring and criminal justice reform that you want to see done in your time as governor?
Well, I think I haven't got the fee elimination done yet on when they get out of prison and kind of making that make sense. Just some more pardon and parole reform. The expungement stuff is important for us to continue to consider. And then sentencing reform is something we think we're going to get done this year. I mean, I've been pushing since 2019. I had to get the DAs involved, and then the Attorney General, and then you got the prosecutors, and trying to get everybody at the table, because here's what happens trying to get legislation done. If you know it makes sense, you know it's the right thing to do, but then these outside groups come and influence the legislature and say, we're gonna take you out, we're gonna spend money against you, and we're gonna call you weak on crime, and blah, blah, blah. And so trying to get everybody to the table where they don't fight it is really, really important. But sentencing reform is like an A through F. Texas, we're modeling after Texas. And what is a violent crime? What is a nonviolent crime? Mm-hmm. And kind of getting those down, and also shortening the gaps. Like right now, what's crazy to me is I'll have some counties. Well, the prosecutors could give somebody 1 year or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And why are the gaps so big, right? So I'm trying to get those narrowed down a little bit. Hey, if Oklahoma's going to say, this crime is worth 3 years, then it should be worth 3 years pretty much in every county, not 30 years in this jury and 30 years here. And so that sentencing reform is really, really important for me, and I'm trying to get that across the finish line this year. I've got buy-ins finally from the district attorneys, and I've set these committees up to bring them in, because I can't write the laws. I've got to get the legislature to do it, so I have to influence, and I've learned kind of how to get that done. But that sentencing reform is probably the thing we're working on the most this year. Some of the expungement stuff, some of the juvenile expungement, trying to get it done as soon as they turn 18 is important, and then the fee elimination.
I think everyone in this room will join me in saying that we're going to be so interested to following Oklahoma over the next few years. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for being here.
All right, I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch and their cupcakes as much as I did. With that, we're going to introduce our next panel. Please welcome to the stage our moderator, Stan Ball, Vice President and Chief Litigation Counsel at Eaton, and panelists Matt Joyce, partner at Envoy, Patrick Peters, principal at Jackson Lewis, and Carrie Casey, Global Head of University Recruiting, Talent Branding, and Diversity Recruiting at PayPal, to discuss the work of employers to develop practices that support employment for the more than 80 million Americans with a criminal record. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I've got two kind of quick housekeeping items. The first is I was raised by a woman who grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and she always told me when you go to somebody's house, you say thank you. So I have to start my remarks from a position of gratitude. Thank you to Columbia Business School for having us. My partner in creativity, Nan Gibson, I think when we kind of launched the coalition, this is something we probably never thought would happen so quickly. So thank you to Columbia for hosting us. The second thing I just want to make sure that we give the team here is two companion pieces that I recommend that you read in addition to the remarks that you've already heard today and the remarks that you're going to hear shortly. The first is Providing Another Chance, which is produced by RAND Corporation. It's a 2022 study. I encourage you to read it. And the second publication I encourage folks to read is Untapped Talent. It's a book that was published by author was Jeff Korzenick. It was published in 2021. Those are two good resources to look at if you just want to have a little bit more context and a little bit more of the numbers and the science that supports everything that we've discussed today. What we're going to do here with this panel is we're going to have a really kind of a tactical conversation that's split into three parts. The first part is looking at second chance hiring practices from the employer perspective. The second thing that we're going to do is look at, what's the candidate experience like and how can we improve that experience? And the last thing that we'll touch on is, what does success look like? What is the indicia of success that it's actually working within an organization? So Carrie, I'm going to come to you first. And for those of you who are not familiar with Carrie, she is the Senior Director and Global Head of University Recruiting, as well as Talent Branding and Diversity Recruiting for PayPal. So she has a lot to do and a lot of responsibilities. But for today's conversation, I want to hear a little bit about, what is PayPal's view on second chance hiring?
Yeah. So, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. I think, this is newer for us, to be very transparent. So what you're going to hear from me today is a real reaction of what we've been going through and experiencing as we launch something new. And what we see is that, today, our hiring needs for skilled talent are increasing every year. And the complication is that unemployment rates are low and job vacancy rates are high. So how do we take this situation and really address our hiring needs? And so we've taken it as an opportunity to really rethink our hiring strategies and our approach. And in particular, trying to think about how we can find unknown talent in often overlooked populations, such as individuals with criminal backgrounds. And so that's really how we got into this. We've been working on this for the last year and a half. We have definitely had a lot of learnings across the way, which we can talk about later. But one of the things that I think we've seen is that I think we all believe that redemption after incarceration is possible. But convictions serve as barriers to reentry oftentimes, where people cannot find full-time, well-paying job opportunities. And then these barriers impact their ability to re-enter the workforce. And at the same time, this impacts corporations who are trying to hire individuals. So the barriers keep, adding up, and then these companies can't prioritize financial health for their community, and they cannot participate in the global economy. And so for PayPal, that's one of our key priorities. And so this really hits home for us and is part of our value and part of our mission. And we understand that our mission to advance economic opportunity starts within. And so we are continually rolling out programs so that we can bolster financial health in the economy. But all of this then trickles into the talent acquisition process. So how can we make sure that we're offering competitive pay and benefits to everybody? And we'll talk a little bit later about what we've seen with some programs where when we're working with formerly incarcerated individuals, there seems to be almost this option of a different pay scale. A job is a job. And we believe in paying somebody for the work they're going to be doing, regardless of where they're coming from. So a lot of the things that we've seen have really hit home in terms of just trying to discern our own moral compass and how we address this topic and how we roll it out.
And you mentioned programs. Are you partnering with organizations that are outside of PayPal to kind of implement your programs?
Yeah. So we have engaged in a partnership with an organization called Next Chapter. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Next Chapter, but they work with formerly incarcerated individuals to try to help them get back into the workforce. And we selected this partnership after many discussions with lots of different other organizations. We selected Next Chapter because they really were closely aligned with our own mission and our priority focus on inclusion. So for that reason, we really selected this organization. They have a very rigorous process, and I actually have notes on it because I'm not sure I'm going to get it right, but I'm going to try. So this organization works with folks who have a criminal background. These individuals who want to participate in Next Chapter have to go through a year of coding or formal training, and then they apply to participate in the program. So they have an application process, they have an interview process, and then they have a technical screening. From there, they go through a very rigorous 12-week immersive experience with Hack Reactor Bootcamp. And then I say if successful because it's a very hard process, it's a very challenging process, and there is a dropout rate along the way. And so if successful, then participants are matched with a partner organization and they participate in a 12-week apprenticeship program. So we are now engaging in our first cohort of apprentices. They'll be joining us in July, and we're gonna be taking active notes along the way so that we can pivot in the moment, see what's working well, what's not working well, to ensure the success for both the individual and for PayPal, and really understand how we can grow this. So we're starting small so that we can make sure that this is working and it's working well.
A lot of sense. Pat, I want to bring you into the conversation. I'm a little too familiar with Jackson Lewis, but just to level set with the rest of the team here, can you talk a little bit about who is Jackson Lewis, what do you all specialize in, and kind of your reach from a geographic perspective?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. My name is Pat Peters, and I'm a principal with Jackson Lewis in our Cleveland office. We started here in New York City about almost, I think it was 65 years ago Sunday. And we mostly did labor relations and union avoidance and then how to work with unions. But then over time, as the Civil Rights Act was amended and other laws came into play with respect to workplace compliance, we've grown both in terms of subspecialties as well as geography. Cleveland, when it opened in 2006, was the 25th office, 400th lawyer. Today we have about 1,000 lawyers spread across about 60 offices in the United States. And some of us hyper-specialize in certain things, including my colleague Susan Corcoran, who's here today, who is one of our firm's nationwide background check resources. So in addition to helping employers, if they, to manage their workforce, we counsel them on these types of decisions. I notice a lot of buzzwords that we heard about paying for the job, not having a penalty. So we do a lot of pay equity compliance. So it's a lot of compliance work, and then, we try to keep employers out of litigation, but when the inevitable happens, we defend employers in those cases as well.
Thank you for your services on that. So what I want to talk to you about here in this case is when employers like the PayPals of the world or the Eatons of the world, and they call you and say, hey, somebody's got this plan that they want to increase our second chance hiring. I would imagine some of those are frantic phone calls from HR professionals and lawyers inside the organization. How do you go about correcting the myths that they have associated with second chance hiring?
So first of all, I think there's three big, when we're thinking about second chance hiring and thinking about changing the way some of your company hiring practices, our top three things, and I think you've heard them already throughout today, but it bears repeating, is remove the box. Right. Number one, like and I saw the video that was very impactful early on with all kinds of different people and looking at that application, they're so excited. You can see the excitement in their face, right? That they wanted this opportunity and this job, and they get to that question, right? So get rid of the box, right? And in fact, in many jurisdictions, not nationwide, but in many jurisdictions, you have to. So you might as well get rid of it if you're a multi-state employer, rather than have a different application for one state versus another. They are becoming more, there are more and more ban-the-box laws enacted, and so we're seeing that would be the number one suggestion. Number two is only do a background check after you've made the offer. So that way you're not factoring in any type of justice involvement in making that decision. You've decided you like the candidate, you decided to make the offer, do the background check, and there may very well be a reason not to go forward with the employment, but at least at that stage, you're not, you can't be accused of discriminating against somebody in terms of actually making that initial decision. And then finally, I think the third main thing we'd encourage employers to do is consider there's a lot of local laws. And in states like New York and states like California, you don't just have to comply with New York federal law, New York state law, New York City law. In California, I know Los Angeles has their own law. So make sure that you're engaged with somebody who's got expertise, hopefully from Jackson Lewis, but if not, somewhere else in those particular areas. But how do you get employers comfortable is talking to them about, where the law kind of stands and why, there should be this flexibility when it comes to justice involvement. For many years, the easy thing to do, and as a lawyer, the last thing I want to be is a roadblock, right? So if a client calls me up and says, can we do this? The answer it can't be no. Right? The answer has to be, we're going to figure out a way to work together and get you there. And when it comes to this particular issue, the way we get companies comfortable is educating them on, making sure that any kind of barrier to employment is job-related, consistent with business necessity. Sometimes those things are absolute barriers. There are certain industries, financial services, for example, where there are certain crimes, unfortunately, that are just statutory bars to employment, right? But a lot of times there's a measure of discretion that the employer can exercise. And so we look at, how old was this person when they had the conviction? How, are there any other mitigating factors? How much time has passed, right? And so I think going through that analysis and going through that process helps employers get comfortable that they're doing the diligence to protect the company, but also giving that candidate that opportunity. And one other thing that was very impactful to me today is some of these convictions that we're hearing about today wouldn't even be crimes. Like we hear about folks, especially in the cannabis industry, and I was just telling Stan, I was visiting Las Vegas a couple weeks ago, and like you walk into the mall, and it's like, they're handing out, recreational marijuana like samples, right? And there's folks who that's their conviction because the law has changed so quickly over time. So I think as societal norms change, as the laws evolve, it is a very fluid process. And so I think getting comfortable means you have to kind of step out of your comfort zone a little bit, because the easy thing to do is just say no, right? We don't hire anybody with criminal convictions, and then there's no harm, no foul, no worry, right? But over time, that's not going to be a sustainable position, both in terms of the law and also in terms of the labor market. So you got to get comfortable, and it's going to take some work, and we're happy to partner with you to do that.
And one thing I want to follow up with you on is I would imagine a lot of times when folks are reaching out to you, they don't ask you the clean legal question. They don't say, hey, what does the EEOC have to say about this? They'll frame it up as, I want to make sure my workplace is safe.
Right.
I'm concerned about safety. How do you go about addressing a type of question like that? Well, it's really not a legal question. It's a lot of bias that's embedded in it, and you're working against it to show the data and the facts. Like, how are you addressing it when that type of question comes?
So I think, a lot of times, when I think about employment law, due process, which for those of you who are not lawyers, basically means, notice and an opportunity to be heard. In other words, it's fairness, right? And I think that to Stan's point, one thing that I'm always cautioning employers, whether it's this issue or any other, is how are we treating anyone else, right? And would this be first of all, maybe someone's self-disclosed, right? Or maybe, have we treated someone differently in the past? Would we treat someone differently in the future, but for this particular issue? And I think helping to isolate that bias, to your point, I think does help employers get more comfortable. And the other thing that I'll tell you a lot of times who we're dealing with on our end is someone who is maybe even at like a director level. And I think it's part of the diligence. I think they want to document that, I called Pat, we talked through it, I'm comfortable, right? So that way, they're still putting their neck out a little bit, but not they're not going it alone. And we're having that interactive discussion, having that dialogue, really thinking about all those factors that may mitigate against barring employment.
Sense. Matt, Envoy. Can you tell the crowd a little bit about what Envoy does?
Yeah, I was going to say we do a little bit of what Pat does without a legal degree. So we work with large companies on
the
implementation.
unauthorized practice of law?
Don't describe it that way, but really we do implementation support. So we work with companies who want to create second chance initiatives, who want to create the culture inside their company to do this, and who want to go through the process of how do we update our practices, how do we create partnerships, how do we create pilots to sort of lead in this work. And then, how do we do the training and the sort of support to our staff, to our implementers, to supervisors and HR managers to make sure we're doing this right and doing this well and making Fair Chance a part of our talent strategy and a big piece of what we do.
I had to challenge you a little bit on your just business model in general. You know, with larger corporations have large HR teams, they have significant legal teams. Why would a large corporation need to have a partnership with a community-based organization to implement this type of strategy? Why do they need that?
So, yeah, I mean, I would start where Pat left off, which I think the first thing companies do is they decide we're going to make a commitment to do this, right? This is something that we care about, our CEO cares about, our team cares about. And then I think there is a process first of what do we need to do to get our house right to make sure we can match our goals with the policies that we have. And I do think as dynamic as what Pat described is a lot of companies haven't revisited HR practices since the 90s, right? And so they may start from a place where, you know, we did it one way for a long time. We may have made changes on the margin since then, but to do the thing that we're setting out to do in this new environment, we need to go back and do a little remedial work. So I think that's a starting point for a lot of companies is just what do we need to look at in terms of things like ban the box, in terms of our hiring matrix, in terms of just the way in which we do individual assessment of candidates to make sure that, again, we're sort of matching up. And then I think the community partnerships piece to us is kind of the crux of where a lot of companies find success in this work. Because I think first and foremost, it creates, you know, real world practices that you can learn from. So a lot of companies will say, well, let's start this in maybe one business unit or one market, a place where we have an awesome leader at this company who wants to do this work, and where we can find great reentry organizations, great workforce organizations that can become our talent pipeline, that can help us vet candidates, that can work with us on what does sort of an interview process and cadence look like, perhaps train us on how to do that right. And then I think equally importantly, you know, make sure that we're supporting those candidates post-hire. So I think one of the big differences in the kind of community organization that will say, you know, here's a stack of resumes of great candidates, go to work, versus one that's going to be a long-term partner is, are they with you and are they with that candidate, you know, in the first month where maybe something is challenging, right? Maybe the company's trying to figure out how do we deal with parole supervision? How do we deal with someone's in stable housing? And so I think those partnerships, to be able to start with a really strong partnership, create a model that the rest of the company can learn from, and then have that model be kind of extrapolated throughout the company is the way we see a lot of companies succeeding.
And what should you look for in a partner?
So yeah, I think first and foremost, it's, you know, are they aligned in terms of the readiness and the support that candidates are getting when they come in? So I think some of the great reentry organizations are starting folks, whether they're a day out of jail or prison or whether they've been out for some time, starting folks with, you know, basics of interviewing skills, workforce readiness, make sure that folks are going into these opportunities as prepared as possible. I think the second thing is that pre-vetting is, and I think we heard this a bit in the ARC and NBC Universal relationship, that to the extent that the partner can really know the company well enough to say, you know, here are the candidates that have the skills and qualifications you're looking for, you know, that have, if you have some convictions that, you know, are going to require a long review process, some convictions that, you know, that you're fine with, that's communicated well enough that the community organization is referring candidates that have a high likelihood of success. And I think that communication is probably the most important thing, because I think you find as a community partner refers, you know, the first 10 candidates, if none of them get through the process, it's going to be a really hard relationship from there, right? And I think the community organization is going to say, you know, is this the right partnership? Whereas if you've done the pre-work and the relationship building, hopefully you're going to have some success early on.
Carrie, before we move on to kind of the next bucket of this conversation, I want to come back to you and kind of summarize what's been discussed thus far. As we think about the employer perspective, I think you'd agree with me that it's kind of split into three parts. The first is the corporation has to make a decision that they want to prioritize recruiting and hiring in this space. The second thing is to really look at their internal policies. What is written down? What do we do? How do we do this work?
Yeah.
And then lastly is the implementation of an actual strategy in a specific geographic region to create the sustainable pipeline, have the community-based organizations. So I see the head nodding, which lets me know.
Yes, and on that last button, I would just say over the lifetime of the employee, not just when they arrive. So you really need to partner long-term, and that's a commitment that has to be made upfront. If we can't make that commitment, I just don't think it will work.
That makes a lot of sense. And so the one thing that I wanted to circle back with you on is, I think corporations have the tendency of, let me do as much as I can inside the four walls of my corporation before I bring anybody else in to look under the tent. As you've thought about PayPal's strategy and the lessons learned from what you have done,
Yep.
would you have brought in a community-based organization or a partner like Matt from the very beginning? Or would you still have waited until you kind of
I'd love to have more conversations. I'm loving this conversation. I will say it's illustrative of the past year and a half to 2 years at PayPal, where we have partnered heavily internally. And I heard Dane mention this before, it cannot fall on HR. And so we've been working with compliance, with corporate affairs, with HR, with legal, and we have these rich discussions. And everyone is all in. Everyone is completely invested. And so I do think that that is a critical piece, is trying to think about how you can, and I also think there's something else, which is one, it's this internal partnership, and two is, and it's not just with this audience, I think an employer's obligation to every employee is to meet someone where they are. And so whether that means it's someone joining from Next Chapter for PayPal, or somebody joining from a university, or someone joining from a lateral move, everyone has different needs. And so this cookie cutter approach just does not cut it anymore. It really doesn't work. And so this rich discussion that we've been having right now is very, I think that's what you have to have up front. And so to answer your question, yes, I think it probably would have been helpful. I do think that PayPal was fostering this exact same dialogue. You both hit on things that we talk about over and over every single week. And I think a really important thing to think about is not just, so many organizations are quick to say, oh, we need to do this. And they sign up for something, and then they make a very public appeal about what they're doing. But how does it get over the finish line? And so the question to start with is, what will it take to get this to be successful? Not how do we launch this, not how do we do this, but what's it going to take to make sure this is successful? And really embracing that mindset and knowing when to pivot, right? Because the best laid plans are not right. They're well-intentioned, but this is uncharted territory. And I can tell you at PayPal, we have dropped the agenda multiple times and we've pivoted because we needed to. And I find that rewarding. It tells me that we're not using a cookie cutter approach and that we are understanding what we're dealing with and trying to accommodate things in a very different and unique manner. So I do think the partnership would be helpful. And if anyone is considering a program like this, honestly, call any one of us and engage us in the conversation, particularly these two, because you're more experts, but I'm happy to share my experience as well.
I think just to piggyback on that, I think while we don't want to have a cookie cutter approach, we definitely want to take the time to build the program and then drive consistency. And I think the one thing I'd be remiss in not pointing out is training. And that's where I think a lot of companies or large organizations struggle, is the intent is there, the idea, the concept is there, but the person actually making the decisions isn't trained. And so you get varying degrees of success at different parts of the organization. So I think training is huge, and that obviously is a commitment of time, money, resources, the whole thing. So it's definitely something that should be factored in. But I think to your point, having these robust discussions and considering all the alternatives and pivoting and starting and restarting, I think is very important. And then implementation is huge as well, which is I'm sure something that Matt and his colleagues can help with.
I think that's spot on, and it's a good transition to start talking about what is the candidate experience and what's the actual employee experience for someone who's just as involved as part of the organization. Part of the reason why I want to talk about this is because I think a lot of times when you're outside of a large organization, there's a tone that is set at the top, and the hope is that that tone gets all the way down through the crevices, the cracks, all the way throughout your organization. The reality is, and I'll just talk about it from a manufacturer's perspective, is that the CEO of the organization can come out and champion a cause. But in terms of who's the boss, per se, and I hope Craig's not listening, but in terms of who's the boss, for the large majority of your workforce, it is the plant manager. It is the site HR lead. It is the shift coordinator. Yep. Craig love them to death, is someone who they will never meet, someone who they're not really engaged in, and they can appreciate the overtures. But Pat, to your point, until it gets down all the way to where the employees and the candidates are, those decision makers are at that level, it's not a program that will sustain itself. So Matt, I want to come to you for a little bit. And with that kind of backdrop, and I know corporations are different in different spaces, but what would you say is one of the most important thing that corporations can do to make sure that when someone is hired, someone who's just involved is already in your organization, how can we ensure that they advance their career?
Yeah, I think that, that training is so important. And I would just echo what you both shared, which is, these decisions do get made at the highest levels, and then the implementers are. It's the plant manager in Strongsville, Ohio, that's charged with this, but it's also, the individual supervisors, the coworkers, like all the folks that are, engaged in this that do have to be rowing in the same direction to make this work. So I think, some of it does come from leadership's ability to come in and rationalize why we feel like this is important as a company. Why is this important from a talent perspective? Why is this important from a community impact perspective? To elevate champions, people who, are willing to talk about perhaps their own experiences or the family's experiences with this, and be able to really have this conversation internally at a company. Because I think, the more that we can ensure that there's going to be, there may be pushback, but the pushback that comes, that we've done sort of the pre-work to educate folks. I think from a retention perspective, I think the first couple of weeks or couple of months are really important in this work. And I think, part of what companies can do to make sure that they're successful, I think one is just making sure that people who are implementing this work understand the collateral consequences of justice involvement, right? Understand, to some degree what it means to come out and to have some instabilities that may impact the workplace, right? So that could be unstable housing for a period of time. That could be disconnection from healthcare for a period of time. That could be, as was described earlier, a probation and parole officer who's telling you to meet once a week during work hours, who's perhaps doing a site visit and coming in and wanting to meet with your boss or your coworkers. And so making sure that the folks who are supervising individuals understand, here's what might be happening, and here's how we can approach that, or at least know what the community resources are to help folks work through those initial periods. And I guess I would come back to the community partner as a key piece of that, because I don't think that we can expect large companies to become social workers or to have the kinds of skills that you might need to be effective reentry counselors or effective job coaches. I do think that we can expect those partnerships to be made where, that plant manager or that supervisor has a person to call to say, hey, we're going through a challenge, we're working through something, can we triangulate and support the person? And so I think it does come back to building those effective partnerships and empowering your local team to know what those resources are and how to connect to them.
And when you think about wraparound services, and that's kind of the term of art in this space, what would you say are the most important? If you were going to design a fair chance hiring program for a company, what would you say, if you don't support anything else, make sure you have an external partnership that assists with providing these, let's call them top 2 or 3 wraparound services?
Yeah, so I'd be remiss in saying this is important for a lot of people working in a lot of jobs, right? So I think one of the conversations we often have with companies is, how do we be supportive of people who are dealing with, with reentry, but there's a lot of, people dealing with issues related to poverty that are addressing the same things. And so I think, companies do have to figure out, what is our holistic approach to making sure that people who may have some instability in their lives that affect their workplace, how are we approaching that and how are we dealing with it? But to answer your question, I do think, sort of housing and figuring out kind of all of this, I'll call them scheduling conflicts, but all of the real challenges of just getting back from a period of incarceration back into the community, that takes a lot. That's in some cases a full-time job just to figure out, how do we reconnect to all of the things, family, housing, healthcare, all of those things. And then I think supervision is the other one, just because it does come up a lot. And I think it's something that companies are often a little bit afraid of, because it means, hey, someone might be coming on site, someone might be calling out this person who we've been very purposeful about not sharing their conviction, that they have a conviction. And so I think, just making sure that community partners are supportive in those 2 areas of supervision and kind of reconnecting to life and services.
Carrie, I'm going to come to you for this next question. We heard in an earlier panel about just kind of the dehumanizing process that candidates can feel when they're going through the application process. Almost the one woman basically, it was kind of heartbreaking to hear her say, kind of expecting to get let down even after you go through it. And so I want to mirror some concepts. So Pat was talking about banning the box and kind of modifying your procedures to be EEOC compliant. But from your perspective, and how do you at PayPal, how are you humanizing the process, meeting your legal requirements, doing, making those individualized assessments, but how do you think about humanizing that hiring process?
Yeah, so I think the best way for me to answer this question is to share a recent experience. And so we were hiring our first apprentice cohort, as I mentioned, and it was a little bit of a struggle for us in a given day to get an offer letter out the door for a variety of reasons. And so one of our apprentices that we had extended a verbal offer to, so she knew she was getting an offer, but we could not produce a written letter on that given day, which happens. This is kind of normal sometimes, right? These things happen. This individual was very stressed. And so she started to talk to my recruiter, and ultimately we learned that she had a competing offer and that the deadline to make a decision was that day. Now, that competing offer, I don't think she was as excited about it, and it was paying much less. And so she kind of said this to my recruiter, and my recruiter called me up, and I said, you have to drop your script right now. You have to counsel her. You have to work with her as an individual and share with her and guide her that she needs to speak to the other employer and give her the language, because she certainly didn't feel empowered to do that. She didn't have the confidence. I think, quite honestly, she felt lucky that she got a job. Not that she was skilled enough to get the job. She was lucky to get it. And so my recruiter called her back and said, hey, look, you need to call this other organization if you really want to have some time. Here's a script. Let's role play it. And they spent an hour talking back and forth about how she could approach the situation in a way that we were guiding her, but that felt comfortable for her. And so she got off the phone, she made the phone call, she called back, she was exhilarated. She said, they gave me another day. And we knew we only needed a day. She just wanted to see this other letter. So she got the extra time, she felt great, and we are thrilled because she's joining us. But it wasn't a self-serving mechanism. It was more that we wanted her to have the opportunity to make the best choice possible for her and empower her to make that decision. So I think that's an example of just humanizing the process and working with people as people, and sometimes putting these corporate policies aside and just saying, I hear what you're saying. I'm actually really skilled in this. Let me guide you.
Makes a ton of sense. And Pat, how are you advising your clients when there are specific rules they need to follow, particularly when it comes to getting the background check and they're getting this document, looking at it, but how can they be better at assessing the individual and not just focusing on the background check piece of it? What advice are you giving them?
So yeah, so a lot of the things that we are, like I mentioned previously, the EEOC, and they call them the green factors, but it's job-related and consistent with business necessity. And so, talking about the role, talking about the candidate, talking about whatever factors might mitigate against a bar to employment. But really, we spend a lot of time going back and forth with our client, who's the hiring person, whether that's an HR or the hiring manager, getting them to really understand, should this conviction serve as a bar to employment, and really trying to look at that individual as, to your point, a human being. That said, we also have to drive consistency. So, a lot of it is, how have we treated others in the past? How do we intend to treat others in the future? Are there any special rules with this particular position? Are they in a different jurisdiction? What industry you're in? Like I mentioned before, financial services, insurance, healthcare, education. All these industries have different rules based on different regulations, and so it really does get fairly involved. And there's a pretty robust back and forth when these background checks come up. But our goal is to work with the client and advise them and manage the risk. And then hopefully, and then to your point also, the FCRA and other laws like it require very strict compliance with how the process goes. So a lot of what I was talking about is the substance in terms of, what is the conviction, what is the potential bar, what does the job look like, and then also, but the process has to be followed pretty strictly because there are statutory penalties involved with that as well. So it's definitely is a back and forth, and ultimately it's getting the employer comfortable or not. I mean, in some instances, we have to revoke the conditional offer based on one reason or another. But it's at least spending the time to do that diligence, documenting that diligence, so that if you're ever questioned about it later on, you can prove that you went through that process and really did consider all these other factors that should be weighed when making those decisions.
A lot of sense. I think the one thing, just one quick follow-up on that, one of the things that they are required to do is to give the candidate notice of a potential adverse action. And oftentimes in those letters, what they will invite the candidate to do is to dispute the accuracy of a background check. Now, here's the problem with that, is that the background checks, there's a lot of information that is left off. And while a particular conviction may be accurate, the context is nowhere on that document. And so I'm just curious, and I'll just open this, I won't put you in the hot seat too long, but I'm just curious from the rest of the team here, how are you working with your organizations to make sure that, yes, we're going to comply with what the law requires, but we're going to at least invite our candidates to give context to the extent they feel comfortable?
I can jump in there. So one piece of data I would love to see for the research community in the room is that the question of when those letters go out, right? Somebody gets an offer, or conditional offer, a conviction comes up, the conviction has some concern, the letter goes out to the candidate to say, dispute, give us context. What's the likelihood that that candidate gets back versus moving on to the next employer? I think in a traditional environment where it's a letter rather than some of the outreach you discussed, it's quite low, would be my guess. And so I think for the employers that really want to put individual assessment into their process and say, we are moving away from red lights and green lights, right, into a place where we're looking at humans applying for a job, then you really have to put some thought into what does that individual assessment look like, right? How is the candidate receiving that? Because if somebody calls me and says, we think you're an amazing candidate for this job, this thing came up, we'd love to just invite you in or invite you to a conversation with folks to just talk about, the context of the conviction, talk about what you've been doing since, just give us a sense so we can make a holistic decision. And I think that has to happen proactively in order for it to be meaningful, I'd say is piece one. I'd say the second piece is a lot of the folks ultimately tasked with making the decisions on the individual assessments may not be super empowered to say yes, right? May not have a lot of incentive to say yes and may not be in a position where they feel like they have the framework on how do we get to a yes. And so I think for companies that are building these individual assessment processes, to be able to say, what do we need to hear in order to say yes? And give, perhaps a junior HR person who's tasked with that a framework to say, here's some questions to ask, here's how to work through the process. And ultimately, there's a way in which we can hear what we need to hear to have the candidate's experience, the candidate's qualifications trump the conviction that we see.
Well, I think just, I think it's also the push and the pull between taking the time and investing the resources. And that's where it has to start at the top, but the training has to, spread throughout the organization. Because the easy thing to do is click in your HRIS system, and then it's going to auto-generate the notices that need to go out. And you know what I mean? All those statutory things are going to be complied with, but you haven't taken that step back to really think about whether or not this particular issue should bar this candidate from working for you. So it really is just a matter of if the organization is going to take the time and put that effort in, because like I said before, the easy answer is, just click the box. And to your point, is there an incentive? Are you empowering those people who are on the front lines making those decisions and training them appropriately, both in terms of complying with the law, but also being consistent with whatever the overarching philosophy behind the company is.
Yeah, and in full transparency for us and that anecdote that I just shared, that was why the offer letter was delayed, because we were working outside the system and it was a manual process because we needed to discuss it and we needed to make sure that it wasn't going through the normal protocols. And so that does cause a delay. So yes, I think, but these are things that, we thought through upfront. And I think that's part of the decision is you can't just decide to go into this. You have to think about every stage of the process and understand where are the bottlenecks, what do you need to do to resolve those ahead of time. So on the other side, you've got a person.
Right, makes total sense. As we wrap here, and I want to be respectful of time, Matt, I'd like you to have the last word on this. For all of the companies that you've worked with and partnered with, I would assume because it's corporate America, they want instantaneous results. But if you can just share a few words on what does a realistic time horizon look like? And ultimately, what does success look like if you're implementing these strategies?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's maybe a few answers to that. I think in terms of creating and implementing pilot programs and creating these hopefully deep, meaningful relationships with community organizations, I do think you've got to put in the several months of time to find the right organization, to build the partnership, to create the kind of trust to ultimately build that, to get to a place where they are successfully referring candidates in, you're hiring those candidates, hopefully those candidates are successful. The only caveat I'd say is there's some low-hanging fruit that can be done pretty quickly. So, Patrick started with ban the box. There are actions that you can take, like banning the box, like how you look at arrest records versus conviction records, where if you just make some sort of black and white decisions as a company that we're going to do this differently, you can see some pretty overnight effects. And I'll just share one quick anecdote, which is we worked with a company for several years, but really, the first thing that they did was ban the box and sort of change their hiring matrix a bit. And they were kind enough to share the data with us, which is sometimes challenging. But what they saw after a year was a disqualification rate that went from 20%, so 1 in 5 candidates were being dinged for their conviction, to 8% in a year. And that's sort of 1 or 2 fundamental policy changes that they've made. So I think to do the long game, you have to put in the time and you have to build these relationships, and hopefully you create kind of a network of great partners. But I would say there are some upfront changes employers can make quickly.
Wonderful. Carrie, Matt, Pat, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Please give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the role that the business community can play in driving second chance employment. Whether it's the CEOs, heads of D&I, general counsels, the hiring managers, the frontline managers, it takes all of us to actually not just do it, but to make it successful. It's not just the right thing to do, but it's also a business imperative as we think about the future of talent and what it's going to look like to open that aperture to everyone. I have a call to action for you today. A little duplicative of what I said at the outset, just in case you weren't going to stick around. If you're a member of the business community attending today's event and are interested in joining the Second Chance Business Coalition, get in touch with us. Visit our website, secondchancebusinesscoalition.org, to view the upcoming legal considerations reference guide that Patrick referenced during this panel discussion. The updated partner map that Matt mentioned. We need to link and leverage. We can't pretend as if nothing's been done in Chicago. We have to look at what government's doing, what the business community is doing, the nonprofit sector. How do we leverage? Because the only way to get to scale and accelerate the rate of change is to link and leverage those collective efforts. You can use your phone to access the site via the QR code on the screen behind me. And on the site, you can also connect with the Second Chance Business Coalition. Lastly, before I turn it over to Aiden, if you've done an event, you know these take a village. They take a lot of time and effort. And there are a couple of folks I just want to quickly thank. We could not do this among the CEO ranks if it weren't for the leadership of Jamie Dimon and Craig Arnold and his respective team, Stan and Nan, as we finally call them. It is really their leadership, galvanizing others to do this work that is critical. On the operationalizing this event, my colleagues at BRT, Molly and Aaron and Jennifer and Matthew, I think that's everyone. Huge thanks. What a pleasure and an honor it is to work side by side with such professional colleagues. We operate as a team. Not a lot of chatter not any chatter behind each other's backs. We all have the same goal in mind. And lastly, actually not lastly, but Jordan. Jordan does a lot of work for us at Inkling, a firm at Inkling, that he does all of BRT's events. And Jordan, in partnership with the Columbia team, I think have put on a first-class event. And again, those pieces of an event are just as critical to the content that we're working on. And then lastly, Sandra, Diana, Aiden, what a great partnership this has been. We appreciate the thought leadership. Tug and pull. The tug and pull led to, I think, a spectacular agenda. And we couldn't have done it without you, and we appreciate that partnership. So with that, thank you so much. Aiden, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Thank you, Dane, and everybody for joining us today. It's been an incredible pleasure, and especially for the Second Chance Business Coalition companies, everything they're doing to advance opportunities for people with records. As Dane said, I want to give a special thank to our team at Columbia, Sandra, Dan Wong, Diana, Hannah, Hattie, Alana, Dario, Archana, and to our colleagues at JPMorgan, as Dane mentioned, Nan. This conference really happened out of a conversation that happened back in the fall, and really appreciate the thought leadership there, and for all of the time spent organizing today. Before we leave today, I want everybody to kind of center back to where we started today and think about, I asked everybody to think about who's somebody that's really close to you, and what would it mean if they did not have an opportunity, right? And I want to actually use myself as an example, right? This conference, would we be here today if somebody had not taken that chance, if there had not been that opportunity? There's an incredible amount of work by other people to make this happen, right? But the ability to affect change by making that commitment to one person, right? And as I said before, I am not unique. I had an opportunity. I've had an incredible privilege to be at a place like Columbia, and I think that through the work that we're doing here today, we can spread that and scale it across our country and really make this so it's an issue that we really don't have to talk about anymore. And that's really the vision that we're working towards. Really just appreciate everybody's time here. As a part of that work to kind of scale that out and really spread that impact, the vision for this goal, for this conference, is to engage a larger sector of the business community and business schools in advancing second chance employment. As a part of this goal, there's tentative plans to host or we plan to host the conference at a different university every year. Tentative plans to host at Wharton next year, which we're really excited about in 2024. Please keep in touch with us, and we'll make sure to send along details once confirmed. And again, thank you all for taking the time today, especially to our panelists, especially the panelists on the panel that I was on, Maria, Makita, Tyler, and Austin. Really appreciate the time and energy here.